In the year 2013, in a peaceful neighborhood in Minnesota, the sun beamed down on the picturesque streets. Jane and Mark, a married couple, found themselves in possession of 2 old iPhones they wanted to sell. Eager to make a quick sale, they turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a potential buyer. The couple posted an ad online, and to their delight, they received several responses from interested buyers. After carefully considering their options, they settled on one potential buyer named Tyler Ronald Stewart. Tyler seemed enthusiastic about purchasing the phones and agreed to meet them in person. They arranged to meet Tyler at the local park, a public space where they felt safe and visible to others. As they approached the park on that sunny afternoon, Jane and Mark's hearts were filled with anticipation. Little did they know that their lives were about to take a terrifying turn. As they reached the park, they spotted a young man standing near a tree. He appeared nervous, holding a phone and glancing around anxiously. Assuming this was Tyler, they confidently approached him, unaware of the imminent danger that awaited them. Suddenly, without warning, Tyler swiftly pulled a gun from his pocket and pointed it directly at Jane and Mark. Time seemed to stand still as fear coursed through their veins, paralyzing them with dread. "Give me your phones and wallets, or I'll shoot," Tyler demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. Jane and Mark, caught off guard and overwhelmed by terror, complied without hesitation. They handed over their phones and wallets, praying that this would be enough to satisfy their attacker and spare their lives. However, Tyler's greed knew no bounds. Unsatisfied with their initial surrender, Tyler intensified his demands, threatening to shoot them if they didn't comply further. Desperation etched across their faces. Jane and Mark had no choice but to give in to his demands, their hearts pounding in their chests. Having taken everything they possessed, Tyler snatched the items from their trembling hands and hastily retreated, disappearing into the nearby woods. Left alone, shaken, and traumatized, Jane and Mark mustered the courage to call the police, their trembling voices relaying the horrific ordeal they had just endured. Within minutes, law enforcement arrived at the park, their sirens piercing the previously serene atmosphere. They swiftly took charge, comforting Jane and Mark, while diligently gathering every detail of the incident. Determined to bring the perpetrator to justice, the police launched a full-scale investigation. Using the park's surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts from passers-by, the police managed to identify Tyler as one of the assailants. With their leads in hand, they diligently tracked him down and apprehended him, ensuring that he would face the consequences of his actions. Tyler was charged with assault and robbery with a weapon, and during his trial, he pleaded guilty, confessing to his role in the crime. He offered a glimpse into the events leading up to the attack, revealing that he and his accomplices had been under the influence of drugs, which heightened their aggression and fueled their violent actions. The judge, determined to protect the community from such acts of violence, handed down a harsh sentence. Tyler was sentenced to 27 years in prison. A firm message sent that society would not tolerate such heinous acts. As for Jane and Mark, they struggled to find solace in the aftermath of the traumatic incident. They soon realized that they had narrowly escaped with their lives and were consumed by a newfound appreciation for their safety. They vowed to themselves that they would never again put themselves in harm's way or take unnecessary risks. The experience left an indelible mark on their lives, a reminder of the fragility of human existence and the importance of valuing one's own well-being. They sought support and therapy to heal from the trauma, drawing strength from each other as they gradually rebuilt their lives. In the small town of Millfield, located in the heart of Illinois, there was a dark and disturbing incident that shook the community to its core. It all started in the year 2022, when Mark Reynolds, a college student struggling to make ends meet, decided to sell his old iPhone. With mounting bills and a desire to earn some extra cash, he posted an ad on Craigslist, hoping to find a buyer. Days passed, and Mark began to lose hope of finding a buyer for his phone. But then, on a rainy evening in early October, he received an email response from a potential buyer named John Thompson. John expressed interest in the phone and proposed meeting in person to finalize the deal. The email seemed harmless enough, and Mark, eager to make the sale, agreed to the meeting. On a chilly Friday afternoon in the year 2022, Mark made his way to a nearby park to meet John. He didn't think much of it at the time, as he had bought and sold items on Craigslist before without incident. However, as he arrived at the park, his heart sank. John was not alone. He was accompanied by two other men, who seemed to be lurking in the shadows. Mark's instincts told him that something was off, but before he could react, John suddenly lunged at him. In a moment of sheer terror, Mark realized that he was being attacked. He desperately tried to defend himself, but in the chaos that ensued, a gunshot rang out. The bullet pierced through Mark's chest, leaving him gasping for breath as he fell to the ground. Unbeknownst to Mark, a passerby had witnessed the horrifying scene unfold. They immediately dialed 911, and within minutes, police cars and an ambulance were rushing towards the park. When the authorities arrived, they found Mark lying in a pool of his own blood, barely clinging to life. The paramedics worked frantically to stabilize him before rushing him to the nearest hospital. The news of Mark's murder spread like wildfire throughout the town of Millfield. Shock and disbelief gripped the community, and a wave of anger washed over its residents. The police launched a full-scale investigation, determined to bring the perpetrators to justice. As days turned into weeks, the authorities painstakingly pieced together the events leading up to Mark's tragic demise. They discovered that John Thompson had a criminal history and had been involved in other thefts and acts of violence related to Craigslist transactions. It became clear that Mark had unknowingly stumbled into a dangerous trap set by a group of criminals. Finally, the police managed to track down and apprehend John, along with his two accomplices. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and they were charged not only with Mark's murder, but also with a string of other crimes related to Craigslist scams and thefts. The trial that followed was intense and emotional. Mark's family and friends attended every court session, hoping for a sense of closure. The evidence presented against John and his accomplices painted a grim picture of their nefarious activities. The judge and jury were appalled by the callousness of the crimes committed. After careful deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. John Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His accomplices, facing a mountain of evidence against them, also received lengthy prison sentences. While the community found some solace in the fact that justice had been served, they were left grappling with a profound sense of loss and a lingering question. What could have been done to prevent such a tragedy? The incident served as a stark reminder to the people of Millfield and beyond about the dangers of conducting business with strangers online. It ignited a renewed conversation about personal safety and the importance of taking precautions when meeting with people in person. In the aftermath of Mark's murder, the town came together to establish safety measures for online transactions. The police department collaborated with community leaders to create safe zones for exchanges, where people could conduct their transactions under the watchful eye of law enforcement. Mark's family and friends, devastated by their loss, channeled their grief into advocacy work. They started a foundation in his memory dedicated to raising awareness about the risks associated with online transactions and providing support to victims of similar crimes. The tragedy left an indelible mark on the community of Millfield. It served as a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of staying vigilant in an increasingly interconnected world. Mark's memory lived on in the hearts of those who knew him, and the lessons learned from his untimely death served as a beacon of caution and resilience for generations to come. In the year 2022, in the bustling city of Arlington, Texas, a sense of anticipation hung in the air as the scorching summer sun beat down on the streets. Among the crowd, 26-year-old Kerry Johnson, a friendly and tech-savvy young man, decided to sell his iPhone through Craigslist. Having used the site before without any issues, he saw it as a convenient way to find a buyer quickly. Carey carefully crafted an ad, highlighting the features of his phone and posting it on the popular online platform. Within a few hours, a message popped up in his inbox from a potential buyer named Marcus Thompson. Marcus expressed his interest in the phone and suggested meeting at a nearby apartment complex to inspect and finalize the purchase. Initially, Carey felt a twinge of hesitation, meeting someone he didn't know in person. However, the allure of a quick sale and the public nature of the location reassured him. To err on the side of caution, he invited his friend, David Anderson, to accompany him to the meeting. Safety in numbers, they thought. Days turned into nights, and the fateful evening arrived. Carey and David made their way to the designated meeting spot at the apartment complex, where Marcus awaited their arrival. As they exchanged greetings, Marcus seemed like an ordinary person, with no indications of the sinister intentions that lay beneath his facade. Carey handed over the phone to Marcus, who carefully inspected it, pretending to be genuinely interested. Then Marcus made a peculiar request. He asked Carey to remove the SIM card from the device for closer examination. Unbeknownst to Carey, this seemingly innocent act would be the trigger that set forth a chain of events that would shatter lives. Trusting Marcus, Carey complied without giving it a second thought. In that instant, as the SIM card left its slot, Marcus swiftly reached into his pocket and brandished a firearm. Panic and disbelief gripped Carey and David as they realized they had fallen into a carefully orchestrated trap. In the blink of an eye, Marcus fired his gun, the deafening sound shattering the tranquility of the parking lot. Bullets pierced through the air, striking Carey multiple times in the chest and thigh. David, driven by instinct and desperation, lunged towards Marcus to protect his friend, but was too late to prevent the onslaught. In a cruel twist of fate, Marcus fled the scene, leaving Carey gasping for breath, lying helplessly on the ground, his life hanging in the balance. The echoes of sirens blared through the night as David quickly dialed emergency services, his voice trembling with fear and urgency. Within moments, police cruisers screeched to a halt, and paramedics rushed to the critically injured Carey's side. Despite their best efforts, the medical team struggled to stabilize him. The battle to save Carey's life was valiant, but tragically, he succumbed to his injuries a few hours later, leaving a void in the hearts of his family and friends. News of the heinous crime spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the Arlington community. The brutal incident served as a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking within the realm of online transactions. The police wasted no time launching a comprehensive investigation, uncovering the intricate web of deceit woven by Marcus. Their inquiries revealed that Marcus had created a fake Craigslist account, meticulously planning the attack well in advance. He had carefully selected the parking lot of the apartment complex, having scoped out the area beforehand, waiting patiently for his unsuspecting prey. Days turned into sleepless nights for the Arlington Police Department, but that dedication bore fruit. A few days later, they apprehended 18-year-old Dion Williams, a known criminal with a history of violence, on charges of murder and robbery. The arrest provided a glimmer of solace to a grieving community, reassuring them that justice would be served. The tragic loss of Carey sent shockwaves through the city, leaving its residents grappling with a mixture of sorrow, anger, and fear. In the aftermath of the incident, the police and local authorities rallied to spread awareness about the perils of online transactions. They urged people to exercise caution, verify the identities of potential buyers or sellers, and choose well-lit public locations for meetings. Carey's family, devastated by the unimaginable loss, found solace in the overwhelming support they received from the community. Determined to prevent similar tragedies from befalling others, they established the Carey Johnson Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to raising awareness about the dangers of online transactions and promoting safety guidelines. In the end, Carey's untimely demise stood as a poignant reminder of the need for vigilance in an increasingly interconnected world. It underscored the importance of being aware of our surroundings, trusting our instincts, and taking precautionary measures to protect ourselves from potential dangers. As a united community, empowered with knowledge and determination, we have the power to ensure that the echoes of tragedy fade away, replaced by the harmonious symphony of safety and empathy. In the year 2019, in the bustling state of Texas, a young college student named Sarah embarked on a journey that would forever alter the course of her life. Seeking a new laptop, she perused the internet and stumbled upon a promising deal on Craigslist. Unbeknownst to her, this seemingly innocuous decision would soon plunge her into a perilous ordeal. Sarah, a spirited and adventurous soul, arranged to meet the vendor at a residential address. With excitement and anticipation, she made her way to the designated location. As she arrived, the sun painted the sky with vibrant hues, casting a warm glow over the surroundings. Little did she know that this serene day would soon transform into a nightmare. As Sarah approached the house, two men, clad in casual attire, greeted her at the door. They exuded an air of congeniality, putting her initial concerns at ease. The men, introducing themselves as Mike and Jake, invited her inside. With hesitant trust, Sarah stepped across the threshold, unaware of the sinister intentions that lay hidden beneath their facade. The interior of the house seemed ordinary, with hints of a typical suburban dwelling. Amidst casual chit-chat, the vendor unveiled the laptop Sarah had come to purchase. The device gleamed under the soft glow of the room, its allure captivating her attention. A brief conversation ensued, causing Sarah's excitement to soar. However, as fate would have it, a dark twist awaited her. In an abrupt and startling turn of events, one of the men, Mike, seized Sarah's arm, his grip unyielding and forceful. Panic gripped her heart as she struggled, but her efforts proved futile against the overwhelming strength of her captor. With a swift motion, Jake slammed the door shut, barricading them from the outside world. A chilling realization settled upon Sarah's trembling form as the menacing duo made their demands. The once friendly countenance of Mike and Jake transformed into malevolent masks of greed and violence. They demanded her valuables, her phone, her wallet, and any possession of worth. Fear surged through Sarah's veins as she hesitated, desperately clinging to the remnants of her personal security. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and Sarah's every instinct screamed for her to escape. However, her desperate pleas fell upon deaf ears, drowned out by the impending storm. The men, fueled by their ruthless desires, began to rain blows upon her defenseless form. Fists collided with flesh, mercilessly shattering the fragile facade of her safety. A bat, snatched from the depths of the garage, became an instrument of torment, amplifying Sarah's agony. Silenced by the brutality, Sarah's voice was muffled by a cloth gag, rendering her cries for help mere echoes in the desolate room. Darkness enveloped her senses as she succumbed to the unyielding assault, the world fading into a void of unconsciousness. The assailants, satisfied with their ill-gotten gains, departed, leaving Sarah discarded and broken on the cold, unforgiving floor. It was a serendipitous encounter with destiny that a passerby discovered Sarah lying battered and bruised on the desolate sidewalk. A compassionate soul dialed emergency services, summoning the aid that Sarah so desperately needed. The wailing sirens of an ambulance pierced the air, racing against time to deliver her to the sanctuary of the nearest hospital. Medical professionals, armed with compassion and expertise, fought valiantly to mend the wounds that marred Sarah's body. A broken arm, multiple bruises, and a debilitating concussion testified to the cruelty she had endured. News of the harrowing incident reached Sarah's parents, sending shockwaves of anguish and concern coursing through their veins. Without hesitation, they rushed to the hospital, their love and support the beacon of solace amidst the storm. Meanwhile, the gears of justice began to turn as the police launched a relentless investigation into the heinous crime. With determination and unwavering resolve, they traced the address Sarah had ventured to, unraveling the tangled threads of the malevolence that had plagued her. The identities of the assailants were unveiled, and the hands that had wrought havoc on Sarah's life would soon face the scales of justice. The wheels of the legal system ground on as the court case unfolded, spanning months of relentless pursuit for truth and retribution. Mike and Jake, their hearts burdened with guilt, could no longer deny the weight of their transgressions. With heavy hearts, they pleaded guilty to the charges brought against them: robbery, assault, and the heinous act of kidnapping. The gavel of justice struck, echoing through the courtroom, as the judge delivered a sentence commensurate with the magnitude of their crimes. Mike and Jake were condemned to languish behind cold, unforgiving bars, their freedom forever stripped away. For Sarah, healing was an arduous journey that extended far beyond the mending of her physical wounds. The trauma inflicted upon her had seeped into the depths of her being, leaving an indelible mark upon her spirit. Anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder became unwelcome companions in her daily life, casting shadows on even the most mundane of tasks. Sarah found solace in counseling, a lifeline that helped her navigate the treacherous terrain of her emotions. Though her scars may never fade entirely, Sarah's resilient spirit carried her through the darkest of days. The support of her family and the strength she discovered within herself propelled her forward. With unwavering determination, she returned to her studies, refusing to allow the harrowing incident to steal her dreams. She completed her degree, a testament to her unwavering resolve in the face of adversity. Sarah's story served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the perils that lurk beneath the guise of trust in the online realm. It stood as a resounding call for vigilance and caution when engaging in transactions with strangers. The incident served as a catalyst for change, a vivid reminder that safety should never be taken for granted. In the vast tapestry of her life, Sarah found purpose in sharing her experience, hoping that her story would serve as a guiding light for others. She yearned to prevent others from traversing the treacherous path that she had unwillingly walked. Armed with wisdom and resilience, she embarked on a mission to raise awareness, empowering others to prioritize their safety and well-being. As time unfolded, Sarah's wounds began to heal, both physically and emotionally. She emerged from the ashes of her past, forever changed but stronger than ever. The world may have scarred her, but it could not extinguish the flame that burned within her. With her indomitable spirit as her compass, she embraced life's challenges, determined to seize every moment with a newfound appreciation for the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. Lisa had decided to sell her beloved headphones on Craigslist, hoping to make some extra cash. Little did she know that this simple act would set off a chain of events that would leave her feeling terrified and threatened. It was a typical evening when Lisa posted an ad for her headphones. She wasn't expecting much, just a quick and straightforward transaction. To her surprise, a guy named Mike, who went by the nickname Squirrely, messaged her expressing interest. They quickly negotiated a price and agreed on a time and location for the exchange. Unfortunately, on the day of the meeting, Lisa found herself caught up in a prior engagement and couldn't make it. She reluctantly asked her boyfriend, Jake, to go in her place. After all, it was just a simple headphone sale, or so they thought. Days went by, and Lisa didn't think much of the transaction until her inbox was flooded with angry emails from Squirrely. He was furious that she hadn't shown up in person, as he had expected a female seller. Squirrely accused Lisa of betraying their agreement and demanded that she settle this by visiting his home address. Lisa was taken aback by Squirrely's aggressive behavior, and she started to feel increasingly uneasy about the situation. Who was this guy, and what did he want from her? That harassment continued for several days, leaving Lisa feeling anxious and unsafe. In a desperate attempt to put an end to the harassment, Lisa threatened to involve the police and block Squirrely's messages. She hoped that would be the end of it, but the feeling of unease lingered in her mind. She couldn't shake the nagging question of what would have happened if she had gone to his house. Would she have been safe? One night, as Lisa lay in bed, drifting off to sleep, she heard a strange noise outside her window. It was a chilling sound, like scratching, as if someone was trying to pry it open. Her heart raced, and she lay frozen, not daring to move or make a sound. The scratching continued, tormenting her for what felt like an eternity, until it finally ceased. Lisa desperately tried to convince herself that it was merely a branch brushing against the window, but deep down, she knew it was something far more sinister. Over the next few days, Lisa's unease grew into a pervasive sense of being watched. Every time she left her house, she had the uncanny sensation of being followed. She started noticing strange cars parked near her apartment building, their occupants seemingly observing her every move. Fear began to consume her every waking moment. Then, one fateful day, a package arrived in the mail. It was anonymous, devoid of any sender's name or address. Lisa cautiously opened it, only to find a pair of headphones inside. To her horror, they were identical to the ones she had sold to Squirrely. Attached to the headphones was a chilling note that read, "I hope you're enjoying them, just like I'm enjoying watching you." Her heart pounded in her chest as the realization struck her. Squirrely had been stalking her all along. The fear intensified, threatening to engulf her completely. Lisa knew she had to take action, but she felt lost and unsure of where to turn. She confided in Jake, her ever-supportive boyfriend, who urged her to prioritize their safety. Together, they decided to install security cameras around their apartment. Hoping to catch any suspicious activity and gather evidence against Squirrely. They also contacted the local police, who took their concerns seriously and advised them to remain vigilant and report any further developments. Days turned into weeks, and the constant state of fear began to take a toll on Lisa's mental and emotional well-being. She couldn't sleep, eat, or even step outside her home without feeling the oppressive weight of being watched. The situation seemed unbearable, and she teetered on the edge of despair. Just as Lisa was about to lose hope, the police called her with an astonishing piece of news. They had managed to apprehend Squirrely for breaking into a woman's house and assaulting her. In a stroke of luck, they discovered a cache of stolen items in his apartment, including the headphones Lisa had sold him. The relief washed over her like a cool breeze on a sweltering day. Squirrely was off the streets and unable to harm anyone else. However, even with Squirrely behind bars, the fear still lingered in Lisa's mind. She knew that there were others out there, individuals like Squirrely, waiting to prey on innocent victims. As she gazed out her window, her eyes scanning the shadows, she couldn't help but wonder if someone else was watching her, biding their time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And so, the story of Lisa's harrowing encounter serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the seemingly mundane aspects of our lives. It urges us to remain vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to take action when we sense even the slightest hint of danger. For in this world, where anonymity and deception can thrive, it is only through our own strength and resilience that we can emerge from the shadows unscathed. In the year 2013, in the peaceful town of Michigan, the residents went about their daily lives, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. It was a tight-knit community, where everyone knew their neighbors and felt safe in their small town. However, that sense of security was shattered one fateful day when a brutal murder occurred, sending shockwaves through the entire town. The victim was a young woman named Sarah Thompson, a kind-hearted and ambitious individual who had recently moved to Michigan to start a new chapter in her life. Sarah had come across an enticing advertisement on Craigslist for a car that seemed too good to pass up. Eager to find a reliable vehicle for her daily commute, she contacted the seller and arranged to meet him at a local park. On a sunny afternoon, Sarah arrived at the meeting place, filled with hope and excitement. Little did she know that the man behind the advertisement had nefarious intentions. As she stepped out of her car, a man emerged from the shadows and attacked her without warning. The assailant, whose name was David Mitchell, unleashed a vicious assault on Sarah. He beat her mercilessly, leaving her battered and bleeding on the ground. With a cold and calculated demeanor, David stole her car and fled the scene, leaving Sarah fighting for her life. News of the horrific crime spread rapidly throughout the town. striking fear into the hearts of the residents. The police were immediately summoned to the scene, and an intensive investigation was launched. The town's once peaceful atmosphere was now overshadowed by a sense of unease and uncertainty. The police tirelessly worked to uncover any leads that could help them solve the case. They interviewed witnesses who had been in the vicinity of the park, scoured the area for surveillance footage, and reached out to the public for any information that could aid their investigation. However, the killer seemed to have left no trace behind, leaving the police frustrated and perplexed. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, but the case remained unsolved. The people of Michigan grew increasingly anxious and restless. They yearned for justice, demanding that the killer be apprehended and brought to account for his heinous act. Just as hope began to wane, a breakthrough occurred. A witness who had seen the killer on the day of the murder remembered a crucial detail. They recalled seeing him driving a car that matched the description of Sarah's stolen vehicle. This vital information gave the investigation a renewed sense of purpose. The police meticulously followed up on this lead, conducting thorough background checks and surveillance on individuals associated with similar vehicles. Their persistence paid off when they discovered that David Mitchell had a history of violence and drug abuse. Further investigations revealed that he had used Craigslist in the past to lure and victimize unsuspecting individuals. The puzzle pieces fell into place, connecting David Mitchell to a string of similar crimes committed through Craigslist. The realization sent shockwaves through the town, as they came to terms with the fact that a dangerous predator had been living among them. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. David Mitchell was apprehended, and overwhelming evidence linked him to Sarah Thompson's brutal murder. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing that the man responsible for instilling fear and anguish within their town would face justice. During the trial, it was revealed that David had meticulously planned his crimes, targeting vulnerable individuals who sought to buy or sell items on Craigslist. His manipulation of the online platform had allowed him to exploit people's trust, leading to devastating consequences. The jury found David Mitchell guilty of murder, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While justice was served, the scars left by the tragic event would forever linger in the hearts and minds of the people of Michigan. The murder in Michigan served as a grim reminder of the dangers that could lurk behind the anonymity of online services. It prompted the authorities to take action, launching campaigns and initiatives to educate the public about the importance of online safety. Citizens were urged to exercise caution and follow safety protocols when engaging in transactions or meetings arranged through platforms like Craigslist. The town came together to support one another, fostering a stronger sense of community and vigilance against potential threats. In 2017 in Seattle, Paige Ellington was a struggling freelance writer who needed some extra cash. She decided to sell her old laptop through Craigslist, hoping to get a good deal. She posted an ad online and soon received a reply from someone who claimed to be interested in buying it. He offered to pay $300 for the laptop, which was more than Paige expected. He also said he could meet her at a nearby Starbucks the next day. Paige agreed to the offer and packed her laptop and charger in a backpack. She also brought her wallet, phone, and keys with her. She took a bus to the Starbucks and waited for the buyer to show up. She checked her phone and saw a text message from him saying he was running late and asked her to wait for him outside. Paige thought it was odd, but she decided to comply. She grabbed her backpack and walked out of the coffee shop. She stood on the sidewalk and looked around for the buyer. She saw a man wearing a hoodie and jeans walking towards her. He had a friendly smile on his face and waved at her. Paige assumed he was the buyer and waved back. She walked towards him and greeted him. "Hi, are you here for the laptop?" she asked. "Yes, I am. Thanks for waiting for me," he said. "No problem." "Do you have the money?" she asked. "Of course. Let me see the laptop first," he said. Paige nodded and opened her backpack. She took out the laptop and handed it to him. He took it and examined it briefly. "It looks good. Can I turn it on?" he asked. Sure, go ahead, Paige said. He opened the laptop and pressed the power button. The screen lit up and showed the login screen. He typed something on the keyboard and hit enter. The laptop beeped and displayed an error message saying the password was incorrect. Oops, sorry. I forgot to tell you the password, Paige said. She reached for the laptop to type in the password, but he pulled it away from her. That's okay. I don't need it, he said. He closed the laptop and tucked it under his arm. He turned around and started to walk away. Hey, wait a minute. Where are you going? Paige shouted. She realized he was trying to steal her laptop and ran after him. She grabbed his shoulder and tried to pull him back. Give me back my laptop. You can't just take it, she yelled. He shrugged off her hand and pushed her away. He ran towards a parked car with tinted windows. He opened the door and threw the laptop inside. He got in the car and slammed the door shut. Paige followed him and banged on the window. Open up. Give me back my laptop, she screamed. He ignored her and started the engine. He reversed the car and hit Paige's backpack, which she had dropped on the ground. The backpack flew into the air and landed on the roof of another car. Paige watched in horror as her wallet, phone and keys spilled out of the backpack. The thief drove away, leaving Paige behind. She was stunned and angry. She had just lost her laptop and all her personal belongings to a stranger who had tricked her online. She felt helpless and violated. She looked around for help, but no one seemed to notice what had happened. The people on the street were busy with their own lives, oblivious to her plight. She felt alone and scared. Paige took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. She knew she needed to take action and report the incident to the police. With shaky hands, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, which miraculously hadn't been taken by the thief. She dialed 911 and quickly explained the situation to the operator. Within minutes, a police car arrived at the scene. Officer Johnson, a sympathetic and understanding officer, stepped out of the vehicle and approached Paige. She recounted the entire incident to him, providing as much detail as she could remember about the thief and his car. Officer Johnson assured Paige that they would do everything they could to find the thief and retrieve her stolen belongings. He took down her contact information and promised to keep her updated on the progress of the investigation. Although Paige appreciated his support, a part of her couldn't shake off the feeling that her laptop and personal belongings were gone forever. Days turned into weeks, and Paige anxiously waited for news from the police. She started to lose hope, thinking that her case had been forgotten among the numerous other crimes the police dealt with on a daily basis. However, just when she was about to give up, Officer Johnson contacted her with a surprising update. The police had managed to identify the thief through security camera footage from the area. It turned out that he was part of a larger criminal organization involved in various thefts around the city. With the evidence gathered, they were able to apprehend him and bring him to justice. Paige felt a mix of relief and satisfaction, knowing that the person who had stolen from her had been caught. However, her relief was short-lived when Officer Johnson informed her that despite their efforts, her stolen items, including the laptop, couldn't be recovered. The thief had disposed of them, likely to cover his tracks and avoid being connected to the crimes. Paige felt a wave of disappointment wash over her. Losing her laptop was not just a financial setback, but it also meant losing countless hours of hard work and cherished memories stored within it. She had hoped that justice would bring her belongings back, but now she had to accept that they were gone forever. In 2018, in Los Angeles, Jake Miller was a huge fan of the rock band Metallica. He had always wanted to see them live, but he never had the chance. He was thrilled when he heard they were coming to his city for a concert. He checked online for tickets, but they were all sold out. He was disappointed and frustrated. He decided to look for tickets on Craigslist, hoping to find someone who was willing to sell them for a reasonable price. He browsed through the ads and found one that caught his eye. It said, "Metallica tickets for sale. 2 seats in section and row 10. $200 each. Cash only. Meet in person. Text me if interested." Jake was excited and texted the number right away. He got a reply from someone who called himself Mike. "Hi, Mike. I have the tickets you're looking for. Are you still interested?" "Yes, I am. Where can we meet?" Jake asked. "I'm at the corner of 5th and Main. There's a McDonald's there." "Can you come now?" Mike asked. "Sure, I can be there in 15 minutes, Jake said. "Great. See you soon," Mike said. Jake grabbed his wallet and keys and ran out of his apartment. He hailed a cab and told the driver to take him to 5th and Main. He checked his wallet and saw he had $500 in cash. He hoped it was enough to buy the tickets. He arrived at the McDonald's and looked for Mike. He saw a man standing outside the entrance, holding a brown envelope. He had short black hair and a stubble beard. He wore a leather jacket and jeans. He looked like a typical Metallica fan. Jake approached him and smiled. "Hi, are you Mike?" he asked. "Yes, I am. And you must be Jake," Mike said. "That's right." "Nice to meet you," Jake said. "Likewise. So, you're here for the tickets?" Mike asked. "Yes, I am. Can I see them?" Jake asked. "Sure, no problem," Mike said. He opened the envelope and showed Jake 2 pieces of paper that looked like concert tickets. They had the Metallica logo and the date and venue of the concert printed on them. "Here they are, 2 seats in section and row 10. The best seats in the house," Mike said. "They look amazing. How much do you want for them?" Jake asked. $200 each. That's a fair price, don't you think?" Mike asked. "I guess so," Jake said. He wasn't sure if the tickets were real or fake, but he didn't want to miss this opportunity. He reached for his wallet and took out $400 in cash. "Here you go," he said. He handed the money to Mike and reached for the envelope with the tickets. Mike took the money and counted it quickly. He smiled and nodded. "Thank you very much," he said. He handed the envelope to Jake and turned around to walk away. Jake took the envelope and opened it eagerly. He pulled out the tickets and looked at them closely. He felt a surge of joy and excitement as he held them in his hands. He had just bought Metallica tickets. He looked up to thank Mike again, but he was gone. He shrugged and smiled. He didn't care where Mike went as long as he had the tickets. He put the tickets back in the envelope and tucked it in his pocket. He walked back to the cab and told the driver to take him home. He couldn't wait to tell his friends about his purchase. He was going to see Metallica live. He didn't notice that Mike was watching him from across the street, holding a gun in his hand. Mike waited until Jake got in the cab and drove away. Then he followed him in his own car. He knew where Jake lived because he had checked his phone number online before meeting him. He had planned this scam from the beginning. He had printed fake tickets using his computer and printer at home. He had posted an ad on Craigslist using a burner phone and a fake name. He had lured Jake into meeting him at a public place where he could easily escape if things went wrong. He had taken Jake's money without any trouble or suspicion. He had made $400 in less than an hour. But he wasn't satisfied with that amount. He wanted more. He wanted Jake's wallet, phone, and keys too. He wanted everything Jake had. He followed Jake to his apartment building and parked his car nearby. He got out of his car and walked towards the entrance with his gun hidden in his jacket pocket. He saw Jake get out of the cab and walk towards the door with a smile on his face. Mike waited until Jake opened the door and entered the lobby before he made his move. He ran towards him and pointed his gun at his back. "Hey, buddy, don't move," he shouted. Jake froze and turned around slowly. He saw Mike holding a gun at him and felt a wave of fear wash over him. "What? What do you want?" he asked nervously. "You know what I want," Mike said coldly. He grabbed Jake by the collar and dragged him into a corner of the lobby where no one could see them. He pressed his gun against Jake's chest and demanded, "Give me your wallet, phone, and keys. And don't try anything funny, or I won't hesitate to use this." Trembling with fear, Jake fumbled in his pockets and handed over his belongings. Mike quickly snatched them from his trembling hands and shoved them into his own pockets. Satisfaction spread across his face as he realized he had successfully pulled off the scam. "Now listen carefully," Mike sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "If you even think about reporting this to the police or trying to track me down, I'll make sure you regret it. Consider yourself lucky that you're still alive." Fear and anger mingled within Jake as he stared into Mike's eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe how quickly his dream of seeing Metallica had turned into a nightmare. He had fallen victim to a heartless crook who had exploited his passion for the band. As Mike made his way towards the exit, a surge of adrenaline coursed through Jake's veins. Determination replaced his initial shock and helplessness. He couldn't let this criminal escape without facing the consequences of his actions. Ignoring the pain in his chest from where Mike's gun had pressed against him, Jake took a deep breath and lunged at the thief. Caught off guard, Mike stumbled backward, and the gun slipped from his grasp. Jake seized the opportunity and tackled him to the ground, his desperation fueling his strength. Blow after blow landed on Mike's face as Jake unleashed his anger and frustration. With every punch, Jake's determination grew stronger. He was no longer just fighting for himself, but also for justice. Mike had not only stolen his money, but also his trust and the joy he had anticipated from attending the concert. The struggle continued, each man fighting for control. But Jake's determination and rage gave him an edge. With one final blow, he rendered Mike unconscious, his body slumping to the floor. Breathing heavily, Jake stood up, his knuckles bruised and bloodied. He looked down at the defeated criminal lying before him, realizing that he had just reclaimed a sense of justice for himself and potentially prevented Mike from victimizing others. Grabbing his belongings from Mike's pockets, Jake made his way back to his apartment. Despite the disappointment and betrayal he had experienced, he was determined not to let this incident dampen his spirit. He would find a way to attend the Metallica concert, even if it meant starting from scratch in his search for tickets. With a newfound resilience, Jake picked up his phone and began scouring the internet once again. He refused to let the actions of one deceitful individual shatter his dreams. This time he would be cautious and vigilant, ensuring that he dealt only with trustworthy sellers. And most importantly, he would not let anyone or anything deter him from finally witnessing his favorite band's electrifying performance. As Jake began his search anew, a glimmer of hope returned to his eyes. He was determined to turn this unfortunate chapter into a triumph and make his dream a reality, even if it meant facing obstacles along the way. After all, the spirit of a true fan could never be extinguished by a single act of deceit. In 2016 in New York City, Jake Miller was a college student who needed some extra money to pay for his tuition. He decided to find a part-time job through Craigslist, hoping to find something easy and flexible. He browsed through the job listings and saw an ad that caught his eye. It said, "Looking for a personal assistant to help with various tasks. No experience required. Flexible hours. $20 per hour. Contact me if interested." Jake thought it sounded too good to be true, but he decided to give it a try. He replied to the ad and asked for more details. He received a response from someone who claimed to be the employer. He said his name was Mark Johnson, and he was a businessman who needed some help with his daily errands. He said he could meet Jake at a nearby cafe the next day to discuss the job. Jake agreed to the meeting and wrote down the time and place. He packed his backpack with his resume, laptop, and phone. He took the subway to the cafe and waited for Mark to show up. He checked his phone and saw a text message from him saying he was almost there and asked Jake to wait for him inside. Jake thought it was strange, but he decided to comply. He entered the cafe and looked for a table. He saw a man wearing a suit and tie sitting at a corner table. He had a briefcase and a coffee cup on the table. He looked up and smiled at Jake. Jake assumed he was Mark and smiled back. He walked towards him and introduced himself. "Hi, are you Mark?" "I'm Jake. I'm here for the job interview," he said. "Hi, Jake. Yes, I'm Mark." "Nice to meet you," he said. He gestured for Jake to sit down across from him. Jake did so and placed his backpack on the floor next to him. "Thanks for coming. I appreciate your interest in the job," Mark said. "No problem. Thank you for considering me," Jake said. "So, tell me about yourself. What are you studying?" Mark asked. "I'm studying business administration at NYU. I'm in my second year," Jake said. "That's great. I'm also a business graduate from NYU. Small world," Mark said. He smiled and nodded. He seemed friendly and genuine. "So, what kind of tasks do you need help with?" Jake asked. "Well, I run a small company that deals with online marketing and e-commerce. I need someone who can help me with some administrative work, such as managing emails, scheduling appointments, booking flights, etc. Nothing too complicated or demanding," Mark said. "That sounds doable. How many hours per week do you need me?" Jake asked. "It depends on the workload, but I'd say around 10 to 15 hours per week. You can work from home or anywhere you want, as long as you have internet access and a phone," Mark said. "That sounds perfect for me. How soon can I start?" Jake asked. "As soon as possible." "How about tomorrow?" Mark asked. "Sure, why not?" Jake said. He was excited about the job offer. It seemed like an ideal opportunity for him. "Great, then it's settled. Welcome aboard," Mark said. He reached into his briefcase and took out a contract form and a pen. He handed them to Jake. "It is a contract form. Just fill it out and sign it," he said. Jake took the form and looked at it briefly. It seemed standard and straightforward. He filled out his personal information and signed it at the bottom. "Here you go," he said. He handed back the form and the pen to Mark. "Thank you," Mark said. He took the form and put it back in his briefcase. "Now there's one more thing I need from you before we start working together," he said. "What is it?" Jake asked. Mark leaned forward and lowered his voice. "I need you to come with me right now," he said. Jake was confused by his sudden change of tone. "What do you mean? Where are we going?" he asked. Mark looked around nervously and then whispered in Jake's ear. "I'm sorry, kid, but this is not a real job interview. This is a kidnapping." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he heard those words. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What? What are you talking about? This is a joke, right?" he asked. Mark shook his head and grabbed Jake's arm. "No joke, kid. This is serious business. You're coming with me whether you like it or not," he said. He pulled Jake out of the seat and dragged him towards the exit of the cafe. Jake tried to resist and scream for help, but Mark was stronger than him and covered his mouth with his hand. "Shut up. Don't make a scene. If you cooperate, maybe we'll let you go alive," he said. He pushed Jake out of the cafe door and into a waiting car with tinted windows. He opened the door and threw Jake inside. He got in after him and slammed the door shut. Jake saw two other men sitting in the front seats of the car. They were wearing masks and gloves and had guns in their hands. They looked at Jake with cold eyes. "Who are these guys? What do they want from me?" Jake thought in panic. The driver started the engine and drove away from the cafe quickly. Mark took out his phone and dialed the number. "Hey boss, we got him," he said into the phone. He listened for a moment and then nodded. "Okay boss, we'll take him to the warehouse as planned," he said. He hung up the phone and turned to Jake. "You're in big trouble, kid," he said with a smirk on his face. "You just became our hostage." Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the gravity of the situation. Fear and confusion consumed him as he struggled to make sense of the sudden turn of events. How had a simple job interview led to this terrifying ordeal? Thoughts raced through his mind, contemplating possible escape routes or ways to alert someone of his predicament. As the car sped through the city streets, Jake's mind raced with questions. Who were these people? What did they want from him? And most importantly, would he be able to survive this harrowing experience? He knew he had to stay calm and think of a plan. His life depended on it. Glancing at his surroundings, Jake noticed a small glimmer of hope. His backpack, which contained his laptop and phone, sat beside him on the car floor. Despite the perilous situation, he clung to the idea that these devices could be his lifeline. If he could somehow access them without raising suspicion, he might be able to reach out for help. Jake discreetly shifted his body, inching closer to his backpack, all while keeping a watchful eye on his captors. The car continued its relentless journey, weaving through the city's labyrinthine streets. Jake's heart raced with every turn, afraid that his captors might discover his intentions. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally came to a halt. Jake glanced out the window and realized they had arrived at a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place appeared deserted, with no signs of human activity nearby. It seemed like the perfect location for a sinister operation. Mark, the man who had posed as his potential employer, opened the car door and gestured for Jake to step out. With a gun pointed at him, Jake had no choice but to comply. The two other men in masks followed closely behind, their menacing presence sending shivers down his spine. As they entered the dimly lit warehouse, Jake's senses heightened. He took mental notes of the layout, hoping it would aid him in devising a plan. The air smelled of dampness and decay, adding to the ominous atmosphere. He knew he had to act quickly, as time was running out. Mark led Jake to a small, grimy room within the warehouse. The room contained only a rusty chair and a flickering light bulb that cast eerie shadows on the walls. With a rough shove, Jake was forced into the chair, his hands bound tightly behind his back. His captors stood before him, their cold stares stripping away any hope of mercy. "Now let's get down to business," Mark said, his voice laced with malevolence. "We know your family has money, Jake, and we want our share. We're going to contact them and demand a hefty ransom for your safe release." Jake's heart sank as he realized the extent of their plan. Not only had they deceived him into captivity, but now they were exploiting his family's wealth for their own gain. Fear and anger swelled within him, fueling his determination to find a way out. As Mark spoke on the phone with an unknown person, outlining their demands, Jake focused on his surroundings. His mind raced, contemplating possible escape strategies. He felt a glimmer of hope when he remembered his phone concealed within his backpack. If he could just manage to retrieve it without arousing suspicion, he might be able to contact the authorities discreetly. With a moment of distraction provided by Mark's intense conversation, Jake discreetly maneuvered his body, slowly inching toward his backpack on the floor. His heart pounded in his chest, each second feeling like an eternity. He silently unzipped the bag, his fingers trembling with urgency. In 2018 in Los Angeles, Ryan Lee was a high school student who wanted to ace his exams. He was a smart and ambitious kid who dreamed of going to Harvard someday. He studied hard and did well in most of his subjects, except for math. He hated math and struggled with it. He knew he needed some extra help to improve his math skills and score high on his exams. He decided to hire a tutor through Craigslist, hoping to find someone who could teach him math in a fun and easy way. He browsed through the tutor listings and saw an ad that caught his eye. It said, "Math tutor available for all levels. Experienced and qualified teacher. Guaranteed results. Affordable rates. Contact me if interested." Ryan thought it sounded perfect for him. He replied to the ad and asked for more details. He received a response from someone who claimed to be the tutor. He said his name was Alex Smith and he was a math teacher at a local college. He said he could tutor Rian at his home or at a public place of his choice. He said he charged $20 per hour, which was much lower than the average rate for tutors in Leh. Rian agreed to the offer and gave Alex his address. He said he preferred to have the tutoring sessions at his home, since his parents were usually away at work and he had the house to himself. He said he could start the next day after school. Alex agreed to the schedule and said he would be there at 4 p.m. He asked Ryan to prepare some math problems that he wanted to work on. Ryan was excited about the tutoring session. He hoped Alex would be a good teacher and help him overcome his math difficulties. He prepared some math problems from his textbook and waited for Alex to show up. He checked his phone and saw a text message from Alex saying he was outside his house. Ryan opened the door and saw a man standing on his porch. He was wearing a leather jacket and jeans. He had a backpack and a baseball cap on. He looked nothing like a math teacher. "Hi, are you Ryan?" he asked. "Yes, I am. Are you Alex?" Ryan asked. "Yes, I am. Nice to meet you," he said. He smiled and extended his hand. Ryan shook his hand and invited him in. "Come on in. I have some math problems ready for you," he said. "Great. Let's get started then," he said. He followed Ryan into the living room. Ryan pointed to the couch and said, "You can sit here. I'll sit here." He sat on the opposite couch and placed his backpack on the floor next to him. He took out his textbook and opened it to the page with the math problems. "Okay, so these are the problems I want to work on," he said. He showed Alex the book. Alex nodded and took out his backpack. He opened it and took out something from inside. It was not a book or a calculator. It was a gun. He pointed it at Ryan and said, "Sorry, kid, but this is not a tutoring session. This is a robbery." Ryan felt a surge of fear as he saw the gun in Alex's hand. He couldn't believe what was happening. What? What are you talking about? This is a joke, right?" he asked. Alex shook his head and cocked the gun. "No joke, kid. This is serious business. You're going to give me all your money and valuables right now," he said. He got up from the couch and walked towards Ryan. Ryan backed away from him and tried to reach for his phone, but Alex was faster than him. He grabbed Ryan's phone and threw it across the room. He pushed Ryan down on the couch and pressed the gun against his head. "Don't move, don't scream, don't do anything stupid," he yelled. He searched Ryan's pockets and took out his wallet. He opened it and saw some cash and cards inside, took them out and stuffed them in his own pocket. He looked around the room and saw a laptop on a table nearby. He walked over to it and picked it up. He checked if it was locked or not. It was not locked. He smiled and said, "Nice laptop you got here, kid. I'll take that too." He put the laptop in his backpack and zipped it up, looked around for more things to steal, but there was nothing else of value in sight. He decided he had enough for now, walked back to Ryan, who was still lying on the couch with the gun pointed at him. He looked at him with contempt and said, "You're such a loser, kid. You think you're so smart, but you're so dumb. You fell for my trap so easily. You should have known better than to trust strangers online." He laughed mockingly and said, "Well, thanks for your generosity, kid. You just made my day." He turned around and headed for the door. Ryan felt angry and humiliated by Alex's words. He felt like he had been violated by him. He felt helpless and hopeless. He didn't know what to do next. He had just lost his money, his phone, his laptop, his dignity to a stranger who had fooled him online. He had nothing left. In 2018, in Austin, Texas, a young man named Tyler was looking for a car to buy. He had saved up some money working as a waiter at a local diner and wanted to buy a reliable car that would help him get around town. He browsed Craigslist hoping to find a good deal on a used car. He saw an ad for a 2010 Honda for sale that was in good condition and had low mileage. The seller, whose name was Miguel, asked for $5,000 in cash and said he was willing to meet in a public parking lot near Walmart. Tyler thought that was a fair offer, so he contacted Miguel by email. They agreed to meet the next day at noon. Tyler withdrew $5,000 from his bank account and put the money in an envelope. He asked his friend Ryan to drive him to the meeting place, since he didn't have his own car. Ryan agreed, but warned Tyler to be careful not to trust strangers on the internet. Tyler assured him that everything would be fine, and that he had found out everything about the car and the salesman. They arrived at the parking lot a few minutes before noon. They saw a silver Honda parked outside the entrance to the Walmart. Tyler got out of Ryan's car and walked over to the Honda. He saw a man standing next to him holding a bunch of keys. The man looked about 30 years old, had short black hair and a goatee. He was wearing jeans and a leather jacket. "Hi, are you Miguel?" asked Tyler. "Yeah, that's me." "And you must be Tyler?" the man said, smiling. "Nice to meet you. Is this your car?" said Tyler, pointing to the car. "Yes, it is." "Would you like to take a look?" said Miguel, opening the driver's door. "Sure," said Tyler, stepping into the car. He inspected the dashboard, the seats, the trunk, and the engine. Everything looked clean and well maintained. He was impressed with how good the car looked. "Well, what do you think?" asked Miguel. "It's gorgeous. I really like it," said Tyler. "Good. Do you have the money?" asked Miguel. Tyler pulled out his envelope of money. He held out the envelope to the salesman. Miguel opened it and counted the bills. He nodded and smiled. "Everything seems to be in order," he said. "Great. So can I have the keys and title?" asked Tyler. Sure. Just one thing," said Miguel. Miguel suddenly pulled a gun from his jacket and pointed it at Tyler. "Give me the money now," he shouted. Tyler froze in fear as Miguel snatched the envelope from his hand. Without wasting any time, Miguel ran towards his own car parked nearby and drove away quickly. Tyler was left standing there, shaken and traumatized. He immediately called the police and reported the robbery. Fortunately, there were surveillance cameras in the parking lot that captured the entire incident, including the license plate of Miguel's car. The police were able to track down and arrest all the criminals involved in the robbery, including Miguel. Tyler was relieved to hear the news, but he was still shaken from the traumatic experience. He learned a valuable lesson that day to always be cautious and aware of his surroundings. Although he lost his hard-earned money, he was grateful that no one was seriously hurt and justice was served. In 2019 in Portland, Oregon, a woman named Eloise was looking for a new pet to keep her company. She had always liked parrots, and she found an ad on Craigslist that offered a beautiful yellow and blue macaw for sale. The seller claimed he was moving to another state and couldn't take the bird with him. He asked for $500 cash and gave Eloise his address. Eloise was thrilled and agreed to meet him the next day. She withdrew the money from her bank account and drove to the address he gave her. It was a dilapidated apartment building in a deprived neighborhood. Eloise was a little nervous, but decided to take the deal. She loved parrots and hoped the seller was honest. She knocked on the door of apartment 3B and waited. A man opened the door and smiled at her. He was tall and thin, with dark hair and a thick beard. He introduced himself to Leo and invited her in. Eloise followed him into a small apartment cluttered with furniture and boxes. In the corner, she saw a large cage covered with a cloth. "Is that a parrot?" she asked impatiently. "Yes, that's him," Leo said. "He's a little shy, but he'll soon get attached to you. He's very smart and talkative." Eloise walked over to the cage and lifted the cloth. She gasped when she saw the bird inside. It really was a macaw, but it looked sick and miserable. Its feathers were dull and ruffled, its eyes cloudy, and its beak cracked. When she saw Eloise, she squeaked weakly. "Oh, poor thing," exclaimed Eloise. "What happened to him?" Leo shrugged his shoulders. "He's just old, I think. He's been with me a long time." Eloise felt sorry for the bird, but she also felt angry at Leo for lying to her. She turned to him and said, "That's not what you advertised on Craigslist. You said he was healthy and handsome." Leo frowned. "Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? And he's still healthy enough to live a few more years." Eloise shook her head. "No, that's not right. You can't sell me that bird for $500. He needs veterinary care and proper nutrition." Leo sighed. "Look, lady, I don't have time for this. Do you want the bird or not?" Eloise hesitated. She was sorry to leave the bird with Leo, but she also knew she couldn't afford to take proper care of it. She decided against the deal. "No, I don't want him," she said firmly. "I'm sorry, but you're not getting my money." She turned to leave, but Leo grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Wait a minute," he said angrily. "You can't just walk away from me like that. You agreed to buy the bird, so you have to pay me." Eloise tried to free herself from his grip, but he was stronger than she was. "Let me go," she shouted. Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. "Give me the money or else," he threatened. Eloise was terrified. She handed him the cash, hoping he would let her go. But Leo wasn't satisfied. He demanded her phone, wallet, and car keys too. Eloise had no choice but to comply. After Leo took all her belongings, he pushed her out of the apartment and locked the door. Eloise stumbled down the stairs, shaking with fear and anger. She couldn't believe she had fallen for such a scam. Luckily, a neighbor had witnessed the whole incident and called the police. The officers arrived quickly and found Eloise sitting on the curb, crying. She told them what had happened, and they immediately searched Leo's apartment. They found the macaw and several other stolen items, including electronics, jewelry, and cash. Leo and his accomplices were arrested and charged with robbery, assault, and animal cruelty. The macaw was taken to a vet and treated for malnutrition and neglect. Eloise was grateful for the neighbor who called the police and for the officers who responded promptly. She learned a valuable lesson about being careful when buying things online and dealing with strangers. She decided to adopt a rescue parrot from a reputable shelter and named him Lucky. In 2020 in Reno, Nevada, a young man named Ethan was looking for a new camera to take pictures with. He had saved up some money working part-time at a coffee shop and decided to browse Craigslist looking for a good deal. He'd found an ad for a Canon Mark IV, the professional grade camera he had always wanted. The seller was asking $2,000, which was well below market price. Ethan thought that was too good to be true, but decided to contact the seller anyway. The seller responded quickly and said his name was Mike. He said he was moving out of town and needed to sell the camera as soon as possible. He offered to meet in the parking lot outside the Walmart store at 3 p.m. the next day. Ethan agreed and asked for a phone number, but Mike said he preferred to communicate only by email. Ethan thought this was odd, but he didn't want to pass up the opportunity. He packed his car with his old camera, laptop, backpack, and cash. He also took his driver's license and registration papers just in case. The next day, Ethan drove to the meeting place and parked his car in a spot near the front of the store. He checked his email and saw a message from Mike saying he was running late and would be there in 15 minutes. Ethan waited patiently and looked around for any sign of Mike or his camera. He saw many people coming in and out of the store, but none of them fit the description Mike had given him. A tall man with blonde hair and wearing a blue jacket. After half an hour, Ethan began to feel uneasy. He wondered if Mike was cheating on him or if he had changed his mind. He decided to call him using the payphone outside the store. He dialed the number Mike had given him in his email, but it was disconnected. Ethan felt a rush of anger and frustration. He realized that he had been duped and that Mike would never show up. He cursed himself for being so naive and trusting a stranger on the internet. He went back to his car, hoping to save his day by going somewhere else. But as he approached his car, he saw something that made his heart cringe. His car was gone. In its place was an empty space with broken glass on the ground. Ethan felt a wave of panic and disbelief. He ran to the nearest security guard and told him what had happened. The guard called the police and asked Ethan to wait for them. Soon the police arrived and took Ethan's statement. It told him that they had recently received several reports of similar incidents in the area. They suspected that there was a gang of thieves who were targeting people selling or buying items online. They would lure them to meetings in public places and then steal their cars while they waited. They said they were doing everything they could to catch them. But so far they had no leads. Ethan felt hopeless and devastated. He had lost everything: his car, his money, his camera, his laptop, his backpack, and his personal documents. He had no way to get home or contact anyone. He had no insurance or backup plan. He thought he had hit rock bottom. But then something unexpected happened. A woman who had witnessed the theft came out to him and offered to help. She said her name was Rachel and she worked at the Walmart store as a cashier. She said she saw a man with blonde hair and a blue jacket get into Ethan's car and drive away while Ethan was on the phone. She said she wrote down the license plate number and gave it to Ethan. Ethan thanked her warmly and asked if she could lend him her phone to call her parents. She agreed and handed him her phone. Ethan called his parents and told them what had happened. They were shocked and concerned, but also relieved that he was safe. They told him to stay calm and wait for them to pick him up. Ethan hung up the phone and handed it back to Rachel. He apologized for the trouble and asked if there was anything he could do to repay her kindness. She smiled and said it wasn't a problem at all. She said she felt sorry for him and wanted to help him. Unfortunately, his car was never found and the perpetrators could not be caught. In 2018 Oregon, Sandra was looking for a new cell phone. She had been using the same old model for years and wanted to upgrade to something more modern and sleek. She browsed various online platforms and found a great deal on Craigslist. A seller named Kevin was offering a brand new iPhone for only $500. He claimed to have won it in a lottery and didn't need it. Sandra was skeptical, but decided to contact him anyway. She asked him for more information and pictures of the phone. He responded quickly and sent her some convincing pictures and specs. He also said he would be willing to meet with her in person and let her inspect the phone before buying it. Sandra agreed to meet him at a cafe near her workplace. She decided it would be a safe and public place to conduct the transaction. She drove there after work and parked her car in the parking lot. She texted Kevin about her arrival and asked him where he was. He replied that he was inside the coffee shop and asked her to come in. Sandra grabbed her purse and walked to the entrance. She looked around for someone who matched Kevin's description. A tall, blond man in a blue jacket and jeans. She didn't see anyone like that. She checked her phone again and saw that Kevin had sent her another message. He said he had changed his mind and wanted to meet her at his car. He said the car was parked behind the coffee shop and gave her license plate number. Sandra felt a rush of anxiety. She wondered why he had changed the meeting place so suddenly. She thought about backing out of the deal, but she really needed the phone. She decided to go along with his request, but she kept her guard up. She walked around the building and looked for his car. She saw it parked in a dark corner of the lot, away from other cars. It was a black sedan with tinted windows. She cautiously approached it and knocked on the driver's side window. The window rolled down, and she saw Kevin's face. He smiled at her and greeted her warmly. He apologized for the inconvenience, but he had personal problems and didn't want to stay at the cafe long. He said he had his phone with him and asked her to get in the car so they could finalize the deal. Sandra hesitated. She was uncomfortable getting into someone else's car, especially in such a secluded place. She asked him if they could do it outside. He shook his head and said it was too risky. He said there were questionable people around who might try to rob them or worse. He said he locked the doors and windows for their safety. He advised her to get in the car quickly before anyone noticed them. Sandra was torn between her desire for the phone and her fear of danger. She looked at Kevin's face again and tried to figure out his intentions. He seemed friendly and sincere, but she couldn't be sure. She wondered if he was telling the truth or lying to trap her. She made a decision and decided to trust him. She opened the door and got into the car. She immediately regretted it. As soon as she closed the door behind her, Kevin grabbed her by the neck and pushed her into the seat. He pulled her against him with his weight and covered her mouth with his hand. He whispered in her ear that he wasn't selling anything, and that he was going to take everything she had. Sandra struggled and tried to scream, but his grip was too tight. He reached into her purse and took her wallet, phone, and keys. He threatened her not to make any noise or he would hurt her. He then opened the door and threw her onto the pavement. He quickly got into the driver's seat and drove away. Sandra lay on the ground, shocked and injured. She had bruises on her neck and arms and a cut on her forehead. She couldn't believe what had just happened to her. She cried out for help, and some passers-by heard her and called the police. An ambulance arrived soon after and took her to the hospital. The police launched an investigation and used the license plate number to track down Kevin's car. They found it abandoned in a parking lot a few miles away from the scene. They searched it and found evidence that linked Kevin to the crime. They also obtained a description of his appearance from Sandra and circulated it among law enforcement agencies. They finally caught him a few days later when he tried to rob another victim using the same scheme. Kevin was arrested and charged with multiple counts of robbery, assault, and kidnapping. He was also found to have a criminal record and a history of similar offenses. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Sandra never fully recovered from the trauma of the incident, but she was grateful to have survived it. She'd learned a valuable lesson about being careful and cautious when dealing with strangers, especially online. She hoped that others would heed her warning and avoid falling into the same trap. James was a freelance web developer who lived in a small apartment in Austin, Texas. He was working on a project for a big client, but his old laptop was giving him trouble. It was slow, noisy, and broke down often. He decided to buy a new one, but he didn't have enough money to afford a brand new model. He searched the internet for a used laptop that would meet his requirements, and he found one on Craigslist. The seller claimed it was in good condition and offered a reasonable price. James contacted him and arranged to meet him at a nearby park the next day. James arrived at the park with his backpack and money. He looked around for the salesman, who described himself as a tall man with blonde hair and wearing a blue jacket. He noticed him sitting on a bench near the fountain. He went up to him and introduced himself. The salesman smiled and shook his hand. He opened his backpack and took out his laptop computer. It looked exactly like the one in the picture. James was relieved and relieved. He asked if he could check it out before he bought it. The salesman agreed and handed him the laptop. James turned the laptop on and checked its specs. Everything seemed fine. He opened the browser and tried to connect to the internet. There was no signal. He looked at the salesman and asked if there was a problem with the Wi-Fi. The vendor said there was free Wi-Fi in the park, but sometimes it was unreliable. He suggested they go somewhere else where the signal would be stronger. James agreed and followed him. They went to a secluded part of the park where there were no other people. James felt uneasy. He wondered why the salesman had decided to go to such a remote place. He looked at the laptop again and noticed something odd. There was a sticker on the back that said property of the Austin Public Library. He realized that the laptop had been stolen. He felt angry and betrayed. He turned to the salesman and asked where he got the laptop. The salesman's smile turned into a sneer. He said he had stolen it from the library and that he had more laptops in his car. He said James could buy them all at a cheap price. James realized he was dealing with a criminal who was trying to trick him. He refused to buy anything from him and demanded his money back. The salesman said James had two options: either give him the laptop and walk away, or fight for it. James chose the second option. He clenched his fists and prepared to defend himself. The salesman was bigger and stronger than James, but he was also clumsy. He lunged at James, who managed to dodge him and deliver a hard punch to his stomach. The salesman groaned and stumbled backward. James saw an opportunity to escape. He grabbed his backpack and ran as fast as he could. He could hear the salesman's footsteps behind him. He didn't stop until he reached a busy street, where he could see people and cars. He looked back and saw the salesman disappearing into the park. James was panting and sweating. He checked his backpack and found the laptop still there. He felt a sense of relief and triumph. He had stood up to a criminal and won. But he also felt pain in his arm. He looked down and saw that it was broken. He had probably injured it during the fight. He knew he had to go to the hospital and report the incident to the police. James hailed a taxi and went to the nearest hospital. He had to wait for several hours before he was treated, but eventually a doctor examined his arm and put a cast on it. James told the doctor what had happened, and the doctor advised him to report the incident to the police. James went to the police station and gave a statement to a detective. He described the salesman and the incident in detail. He also showed the detective the laptop and the sticker that proved it had been stolen from the library. The detective told James that they would investigate the case and try to find the perpetrator. A few days later, the detective called James and told him that they had caught the perpetrator. It turned out that the salesman was a known criminal who had been involved in several thefts and assaults. He had been arrested and charged with robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. James felt grateful and relieved. He knew that justice had been served and that he had contributed to making his community safer. He also learned a valuable lesson: to be careful when dealing with strangers and to always trust his instincts. He promised himself that he would never put himself in such a dangerous situation again. In 2020, in Richmond, Virginia, a young man named Ethan was looking for a new hobby. He had always been interested in cycling, but he never had the chance to buy a bike. He decided to browse Craigslist for some cheap deals and found an ad for a used mountain bike that seemed perfect for him. The seller, who called himself Mark, agreed to meet him at a park near his house the next day. Ethan was excited to see the bike and drove to the park with cash in his pocket. He parked his car and looked around for Mark. He saw a man waving at him from a bench near a bike rack. He walked over and introduced himself. Mark smiled and shook his hand. He was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses that hid most of his face. "Hey, Ethan. Nice to meet you. This is the bike I'm selling." Mark pointed to a red bike that looked new and shiny. "It's in great condition. I barely used it." Ethan inspected the bike and was impressed by how well it looked. He asked Mark why he was selling it. "Oh, I just need some extra cash. I have too many bikes anyway," Mark said casually. Ethan nodded and asked if he could take it for a test ride. "Sure, go ahead, just don't go too far," Mark said. Ethan got on the bike and started pedaling around the park. He felt a rush of adrenaline as he rode faster and faster. The bike was smooth and responsive. He loved it. He decided to buy it and return to Mark. He took out his wallet and handed him $200. Here you go. Thanks for the bike, Ethan said happily. Mark took the money and counted it quickly. He smiled and said, "No problem. Enjoy your ride." Ethan thanked him again and got on the bike. He was about to leave when Mark suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "Wait a minute," Mark said in a low voice. Ethan felt a surge of fear as he saw Mark's expression change from friendly to sinister. He tried to pull away, but Mark was stronger. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked nervously. Mark leaned closer and whispered in his ear, "You know what's wrong. You stole my bike." Ethan was confused and scared. He didn't know what Mark was talking about. "What?" "No, I didn't. You sold it to me," Ethan protested. Mark shook his head and said, "No, you didn't. You stole it from my garage last week. I recognized you as soon as I saw you. You thought you could get away with it, huh? Well, you're wrong." Ethan realized that Mark was delusional and dangerous. He had never seen him before in his life. "No, you're mistaken. I don't know you," Ethan said desperately. Mark laughed maniacally and said, "Don't lie to me. I know you're lying. You're going to pay for what you did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. He raised it above his head and stabbed at Ethan's chest, but Ethan managed to dodge the attack and pushed Mark away. He quickly got on the bike and pedaled as fast as he could, trying to escape. Mark chased after him on foot, still wielding the knife. Ethan was able to outrun him and eventually made it to his car. He drove away as fast as he could, but not before Mark had managed to scratch the side of his car with a knife. Ethan was shaken by the incident and immediately called the police to report what had happened. They arrived quickly and searched the park for Mark. They found him hiding behind a tree, muttering to himself. He was arrested and charged with attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. He was sent to a mental institution for evaluation, where it was determined that he suffered from paranoid delusions and severe schizophrenia. Ethan was lucky to have escaped with only a few bruises and scratches from the struggle. He learned a valuable lesson to be more cautious when meeting strangers online, and to trust his instincts when something seems off. In 2017, Philip was a young and ambitious lawyer working at a prestigious firm in Colorado. He had always dreamed of owning a motorcycle, but his busy schedule and limited budget kept him from pursuing his passion. One day he saw an ad online for Kawasaki Ninja, a rare and powerful model he had admired for years. The seller said he was moving out of the country and needed to sell the bike quickly. He offered a very low price, and Philip couldn't resist. Philip contacted the seller and arranged to meet him at a remote location in the mountains. He borrowed his friend's truck and excitedly drove there. He hoped that the motorcycle was in good condition and that the transaction was legitimate. When he arrived at the meeting place, he saw the motorcycle parked next to a rusty van. The seller turned out to be a middle-aged man with a balding beard and a leather jacket. He greeted Philip and handed him the keys. Philip examined the motorcycle and was impressed by its beauty and features. He asked the seller why he was selling it so cheap. The seller replied that he had inherited it from his uncle, who had recently passed away. He said he didn't have a license or garage to store it. He said he just wanted to get rid of it as soon as possible. Philip felt sorry for him and decided to buy the motorcycle without further questions. He paid the salesman in cash and thanked him for the opportunity. He put on his helmet and gloves and prepared to get behind the wheel of his new motorcycle. He turned on the ignition and heard the engine roar. He felt a rush of adrenaline and joy. He was about to fulfill his dream. However, as soon as he shifted gears and accelerated, he felt a sharp pain in his back. He looked around and saw a salesman with a gun in his hands. The man shot him in the spine and aimed again. Philip lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a tree. He fell to the ground, bleeding and paralyzed. The salesman ran up to him and kicked him in the face. He took the money and keys and drove off with the motorcycle and the van. Philip lay there, helpless and hopeless. He tried to scream for help, but no one heard him. He realized that he had been deceived and betrayed by a ruthless criminal. He wondered if he would ever be able to walk or ride a motorcycle again. Fortunately, a group of hikers found him a few hours later and called for an ambulance. Philip was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. The doctors were able to save his life, but he remained paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of his life. The police investigated the crime and were able to track down the perpetrator using surveillance footage and witness statements. The man was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including attempted murder, robbery, and fraud. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Philip's life was forever changed by the traumatic event, but he refused to let it define him. He worked hard to adapt to his new circumstances and pursued a career as a disability rights advocate. He used his experience to raise awareness about the importance of motorcycle safety and the dangers of online scams. He also started a support group for other victims of violent crimes and became a source of inspiration and strength for many. In 2018 in California, Nancy was looking for a birthday gift for her best friend. She wanted something special and unique, something that would show how much she cared about her. She was browsing Craigslist and found an ad for a beautiful pearl bracelet. The seller claimed it was an authentic handmade bracelet and was offering it at a very reasonable price. Nancy contacted the seller and arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe. She arrived at the meeting place with cash in her purse and excitement in her heart. She hoped the bracelet would turn out to be as beautiful as in the picture. She noticed the salesman sitting at a corner table and holding a small box in his hand. He smiled and waved at her as she approached him. "Hi, you must be Nancy. I'm Mark," he said, standing up and shaking her hand. "Hi, Mark. Nice to meet you," she said, smiling back. "Here it is, the pearl bracelet you wanted," he said, opening the box and showing her the jewelry. Nancy gasped when she saw the bracelet. It was stunning. The pearls were round and shiny, and they were connected by a thin gold chain. The clasp was also made of gold, and there was a small heart-shaped key chain attached to it. "It's beautiful," she said, reaching out to touch it. "Go ahead and try it on," he said, holding out the box to her. Nancy took the bracelet and wrapped it around her wrist. It fit perfectly and was smooth and cool against her skin. She admired the way it shimmered in the light. "It suits you very well," he said, leaning closer to her. "Thank you," she said, feeling flattered. "So you like it?" he asked. "I like it," she replied. "Great. Then let's make a deal," he said. "Sure. How much do you want for it?" she asked. "Well, I asked for $200, but since you're such a nice lady, I'll give it to you for $180, he said. "That's very generous of you," she said. "No problem." "With pleasure," he said. Nancy opened her purse and pulled out the money. She counted out $180 and handed it to him. "Thank you very much," he said, taking the money and putting it in his pocket. "You're welcome, and thank you for the bracelet." "It's very pretty," she said. "Me pleasure. I'm glad you like it," he said. Then he grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back. He pulled a knife from his other pocket and put it to her throat. Nancy gasped in shock and fear. She couldn't believe what was happening. The salesman's smile had disappeared, and his eyes were cold and menacing. "Give me all your valuables now," he hissed, pressing the knife harder against her skin. Nancy's mind raced as she realized she was being robbed. She knew she had to do something to protect herself. She fumbled with her purse and handed over her wallet, her phone, and her keys. "Please, don't hurt me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. The salesman sneered and grabbed her wrist again. He ripped the pearl bracelet off her arm, cutting her skin with the knife in the process. Take this too. It's worth a lot, he said, tossing the bracelet into his pocket. Nancy felt the pain in her arm. She was terrified and hurt, both physically and emotionally. She watched as the salesman walked away from her and disappeared into the crowd. She stumbled out of the cafe, screaming for help. Passers-by rushed to her aid and called the police. The ambulance arrived, and Nancy was taken to the hospital for treatment. The police searched for the salesman and found him hiding in a nearby alley. He was arrested and charged with robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and battery causing serious bodily harm. Nancy was relieved that the perpetrator was caught, but she was left traumatized by the experience. She had lost her beloved bracelet, and her sense of safety and trust had been shattered. She vowed never to buy anything from Craigslist again, and to always be cautious of strangers. In 2019 in Oregon, a young man named Ethan was looking for a sofa for his new apartment. He had just moved out of his parents' house and wanted to furnish his living room with something comfortable and cheap. He browsed through Craigslist and found an ad for a beige leather sofa that looked perfect for his needs. The price was only $100 and the seller claimed it was in good condition. Ethan contacted the seller and arranged to meet him at his address the next day. Ethan drove to the seller's place, which was a rundown house in a sketchy neighborhood. He knocked on the door and waited for a few minutes. No one answered. He tried calling the seller's phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. He was about to leave when he heard a voice from behind the house. "Hey, are you here for the sofa?" the voice said. Ethan turned around and saw a man wearing a hoodie and jeans walking towards him. He had a scruffy beard and a nervous look on his face. "Yeah, I'm Ethan." "Are you the seller?" Ethan asked. Yeah, that's me, sorry. I was in the back." "Come on, follow me. The sofa is in the garage," the man said. Ethan followed the man to the garage, which was detached from the house. The garage door was open, and inside there was a pile of junk and a dirty mattress on the floor. There was no sign of the sofa. "Where's the sofa?" Ethan asked. "Oh, it's right here," the man said, pointing to the mattress. Ethan looked at the mattress and realized it was nothing like the sofa in the ad. It was stained, torn, and smelled bad. "That's not a sofa. That's a mattress," Ethan said. No, trust me. It's a sofa. It just looks like a mattress because it's folded up. You just have to unfold it, and it becomes a sofa," the man said. "That doesn't make any sense. That's clearly a mattress. And it's disgusting. I'm not buying that," Ethan said. "Come on, man. Don't be like that. It's a great deal. Only $100 for a sofa and mattress in one. You can't beat that," the man said. "I don't want it. I want my money back," Ethan said. "What money? You haven't paid me anything yet," the man said. "Yes, I have. I sent you $50 through PayPal as a deposit, remember?" Ethan said. The man pretended to think for a moment and then shook his head. "Nope, sorry. I don't remember that. You must have sent it to someone else," he said. Ethan felt his anger rising. He pulled out his phone and showed him the confirmation email from PayPal. "Look, here it is. I sent you $50 yesterday at 3:15 p.m. "See? It says your name and email right here," he said. The man glanced at the phone and then grabbed it from Ethan's hand. "Hey, give that back," Ethan shouted. The man ran out of the garage with Ethan's phone and wallet, which he had also snatched from his pocket. He jumped into a car parked outside and sped away. Ethan chased after him, but it was too late. The car disappeared around the corner. Ethan was left standing in front of the garage, feeling shocked and angry. He had been scammed and robbed by a stranger who had lured him with a fake ad for a sofa. He had lost $50, his phone and his wallet, with all his cards and cash. He felt like crying, but he knew he had to do something. He ran to the nearest gas station and asked to use their phone. He called 911 and reported what had happened. He gave them the seller's name, email, phone number and address, as well as the license plate number of the car he had seen him drive away in. He hoped that they would catch him soon and get his belongings back. But they never did. In 2017 in California, a young man named Ethan was looking for a new bike. He had saved up some money from his job as a waiter and wanted to buy a bike that he could use for commuting and exercising. He searched online and found a good deal on Craigslist. The seller claimed to have a brand new bike that he was selling for half the price because he needed money urgently. Ethan contacted the seller and agreed to meet him at a parking lot near his apartment. Ethan was excited to get his new bike. He took his old bike and his money and headed to the meeting place. He saw a man standing next to a shiny bike that looked exactly like the one in the picture. The man greeted him and introduced himself as Mike. He said he was sorry to sell the bike, but he had some financial problems and needed cash fast. He asked Ethan to check the bike and see if he liked it. Ethan inspected the bike and found it in perfect condition. He asked Mike if he could take it for a test ride. Mike agreed, but said he had to hold on to Ethan's old bike and his money as collateral. Ethan thought it was reasonable and handed over his belongings. He got on the new bike and started pedaling around the parking lot. As soon as Ethan was out of sight, Mike jumped on Ethan's old bike and rode away with his money. He had no intention of selling the bike. He had stolen it from someone else and was using it to lure unsuspecting buyers. He had done this several times before and had gotten away with it. Ethan realized something was wrong when he came back to the spot where he had left Mike and saw no one there. He looked around and saw Mike riding away on his old bike with his money in his pocket. He shouted and chased after him, but it was too late. Mike had disappeared into the traffic. Ethan was left without the money and the bike he had paid for the purchase. He also suffered some injuries from falling off the new bike when he tried to catch Mike. Ethan felt angry and betrayed. He called the police and reported the incident. He gave them Mike's phone number and description, as well as the details of the bike he had stolen. The police said they would investigate, but they warned him that it might be hard to find Mike's since he probably used a fake name and number. Ethan felt hopeless and frustrated. He had lost his savings and his means of transportation. He had no way of getting to work or anywhere else. He felt like giving up. But then he remembered something. He had taken a picture of Mike and the bike before he handed over his money. He had done it as a precaution in case something went wrong. He looked at his phone and saw the picture. He decided to post it on social media and ask for help. He uploaded the picture on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, and any other platform he could think of. He wrote a caption explaining what had happened and asking anyone who recognized Mike or the bike to contact him or the police. He also asked people to share his post as much as possible. This post went viral. Thousands of people saw it and shared it with their friends and followers. Many people expressed their sympathy and support for Ethan. Some people offered him money or a ride. Some people even offered him a new bike. But most importantly, some people recognized Mike or the bike. They sent Ethan messages with information about Mike's real name, address, workplace, or other places where he hung out. They also sent him pictures or videos of Mike or the bike that they had taken or seen online. Ethan forwarded all this information to the police. The police used it to track down Mike and arrest him. They also recovered Ethan's money and old bike, as well as the new bike that Mike had stolen from someone else. Ethan was overjoyed when he heard the news. He thanked everyone who had helped him online or offline. He also thanked the police for their work. He got his money and old bike back, as well as the new bike that he had originally wanted to buy. Ethan learned a valuable lesson from this experience. He learned to be more careful when buying things online, and to always verify the identity of the seller before making any transactions. He also learned that there are good people in the world who are willing to help others in need. He decided to use his new bike for good purposes. He joined a charity group that used bikes to deliver food and supplies to homeless people in his city. He also started a blog where he shared his story and tips on how to avoid scams online. He hoped that by doing this, he could prevent others from falling victim to Mike or other scammers. He also wanted to raise awareness about the problem of bike theft and how to protect one's bike from being stolen. He contacted the original owner of the new bike that he had received from the police. He found out that the owner was a woman named Rachel who lived in another city. She had bought the bike as a gift for her husband who loved cycling. She had posted an ad on Craigslist to sell some of her old furniture, and Mike had contacted her pretending to be interested. He had asked her to bring the bike along when she came to pick up the furniture. He had then attacked her and taken the bike and her money. Ethan felt sorry for Rachel and her husband. He offered to return the bike to them, but Rachel refused. She said that she was glad that Ethan had found the bike and that he deserved to keep it. She said that she had already bought another bike for her husband and that they were happy. She thanked Ethan for his kindness and honesty. Ethan was touched by Rachel's generosity. He decided to do something nice for her and her husband. He used some of his money to buy them a gift card for a bike shop in their city. He also wrote them a thank you note and sent them both along with the bike's registration papers. Rachel and her husband were surprised and delighted when they received Ethan's package. They called him and thanked him for his thoughtful gesture. They said that they were proud of him for what he had done and that they considered him a friend. Ethan felt happy and grateful. He had made new friends and gained a new bike. He had also helped others and learned a lot. He realized that sometimes bad things can lead to good things. He also realized that sometimes good things can come from unexpected sources. He decided to keep using his bike for good causes and to keep sharing his story and tips online. He hoped that by doing this, he could make a positive difference in the world. Lena and Jake were a young couple who had just moved to Austin, Texas. They rented a small apartment and were looking for inexpensive furniture to fill it. They were browsing Craigslist and found an ad for a sofa, coffee table, and TV stand that was perfect for their living room. The price was only $200, and the seller claimed the furniture was in good condition. They contacted the seller, who said his name was Mark, and arranged to meet him in the parking lot outside his house. He said he would bring the furniture in his truck, and they could pay him in cash. Lena and Jake agreed and drove to the meeting place in their car. They arrived at the parking lot around 6 p.m. It was already dark, and there weren't many cars around. They saw a white pickup truck parked in the corner with furniture in the back. They parked next to it and got out of the car. "Hi, are you Mark?" asked Jake, approaching the pickup. A man stepped out of the driver's seat. He was tall and thin with short brown hair and a balding beard. He wore a baseball cap, a plaid shirt, and jeans. He smiled and nodded. "Hi, yes, I'm Mark. It's nice to meet you." "You must be Lena and Jake," he said, shaking their hands. "That's us. Thanks for meeting us here," Lena said, smiling back. "No problem. I'm glad you're interested in the furniture. Come on, I'll show you around," Mark said, and led them to the back of the truck. He opened the back door and lifted the tarp that covered the furniture. Lena and Jake saw a beige sofa, a wooden coffee table, and a black TV stand. For the price, they looked pretty decent. "Well, what do you think?" asked Mark. "They look good," said Jake, examining the couch. "Yeah, they're pretty comfortable. I'm only selling them because I'm moving to another state and can't take them with me," said Mark. "Where are you moving to?" asked Lena. "Oh, I'm moving to California." "I've been offered a job there," Mark said. "That's great. What kind of job?" asked Lena. Mark hesitated for a moment. He looked around nervously. I'm a software engineer," he lied. "Wow, that's impressive," Lena said. "Yeah, well, you know how it is. The tech industry there is booming," Mark said. He glanced at his watch. "Look, I don't want to rush you, but I have to go soon. Do you want to buy furniture or not?" he asked. Lena and Jake looked at each other. They liked the furniture and didn't want to pass up the opportunity. "Sure, we'll take them," Jake said. "Great. Do you have the money?" asked Mark. Jake nodded and reached into his wallet in his back pocket. He pulled out $200 in bills and held them out to Mark. Mark quickly counted the money and put it in his pocket. "Thanks. Let me help you load them in the car," he said. He grabbed one end of the couch and lifted it up. "Can you get the other end?" he asked Jake. Jake nodded and grabbed the other end of the couch. When he did, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He looked down and saw blood dripping from his stomach. He had been stabbed. He choked and dropped the couch. He fell to the floor, clutching the wound. "Jake," yelled Lena. As Lena screamed, the man who had been pretending to be Mark pulled out a knife from his pocket and brandished it towards her. "Give me the keys to your car," he growled. Lena, trembling with fear, fumbled with her keys and handed them over to the man. The imposter quickly grabbed the keys and tossed them to his partner, who had been waiting in the driver's seat of the pickup truck. The second man got out of the truck, jumped into Lena and Jake's car and sped away, with the man who had been posing as Mark following closely behind. Lena, terrified and alone, knelt beside Jake, who was struggling to breathe. She tried to stop the bleeding with her hands, but the wound was too deep. She knew that Jake was not going to make it. As she cried, she remembered that she had her cell phone in her pocket. She quickly dialed 911 and explained what had happened. Within minutes, police cars arrived at the scene. They quickly secured the area and called an ambulance for Jake. Unfortunately, it was too late. Jake had lost too much blood and passed away before he could make it to the hospital. The police launched a manhunt for the robbers, and it didn't take long for them to be caught. The imposters turned out to be a pair of ex-convicts who had been released from prison a few months earlier. They had been using Craigslist to lure unsuspecting victims into their trap and rob them. Lena was devastated by Jake's death, but she found solace in the fact that the robbers had been caught. She hoped that they would be punished for what they had done, and that justice would be served. From that day on, she made a promise to herself that she would never trust anyone blindly again. Linda had always wanted a designer handbag. She loved fashion and style, but couldn't afford to buy the expensive accessories she admired in magazines and online. She worked as a waitress at a busy diner and barely made enough to pay her rent and bills. She had no savings, no family, and no friends to help her. She felt lonely and miserable in her small apartment in Brooklyn. One day on Craigslist, she saw an ad for a Louis Vuitton bag for sale for only $500. The bag was worth more than $3,000, and it looked authentic in the photos. Linda couldn't believe her luck. She had always dreamed of owning a Louis Vuitton bag, and this was her chance to get it at a bargain price. She quickly contacted the salesman, who said his name was Mike, and gave her his phone number. He told her he was moving out of the country and needed to sell his stuff quickly. He said he could meet her at a Starbucks near Central Park the next day at noon. Linda agreed to the deal and arranged to take time off work. She withdrew $500 from her bank account, which was almost all she had left. She also took her ID card and some money for subway fare. She put everything in her small purse and headed to the meeting place. She arrived at Starbucks 10 minutes early and looked around for Mike. She didn't see anyone who fit his description. A tall, blond man in his 30s, wearing a blue jacket and jeans. She decided to wait inside and order coffee. She checked her phone and saw that Mike had texted her that he was running late and would be here soon. She sat down at a table by the window and sipped her coffee nervously. She hoped Mike wasn't a crook or a thief. She'd heard stories of people being robbed or assaulted when they met strangers online. She wondered if she should have brought someone with her, but there was no one to ask. She trusted her instincts and hoped for the best. She looked at her watch and saw that it was 12:15 p.m., and Mike was still gone. She texted him again and asked where he was. He replied that he was stuck in traffic and would be there in 10 minutes. Linda felt annoyed, but decided to wait a little longer. She really needed that bag, and she didn't want to miss the opportunity. She finished her coffee and threw the cup away. She looked outside and saw a man walking toward the entrance of the Starbucks. He was tall, blond, wearing a blue jacket and jeans. He looked like Mike. Linda felt relieved and excited. She got up from the table and walked over to him. "Hi, are you Mike?" she asked him with a smile. He nodded and smiled back. "Yeah, that's me." "And you must be Linda." "Yes, that's me. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too. Sorry I'm late." "That's okay." "Did you bring the money?" "Yes, I did." "Great. Let me show you the bag." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a large brown paper bag. He opened it slightly and showed Linda what was inside. Linda caught a glimpse of the Louis Vuitton logo on the leather. "Wow, that looks amazing," she said. "It's really amazing," he said. "It's brand new, never been used." "Can I take a closer look at it?" Sure. He held out a paper bag to her and watched as she opened it completely. Linda pulled out the Louis Vuitton bag and examined it carefully. In her eyes it looked real. It had a signature monogram pattern, gold hardware, a red lining, and a tag with a serial number inside. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's yours," he said. She looked at him appreciatively. "Thank you so much." He smiled warmly. "You're welcome." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope with $500 inside. She held it out to him. "Here you go," she said. He took the envelope and opened it slightly and quickly counted the bills. "Great," he said. He put the envelope in his pocket. "Thank you," he said. They smiled at each other. "Well, I guess that's it," he said. "Yes," she said. They embraced awkwardly. "It was a pleasure doing business with you," he said. "You too," she said. They let go of each other. "Have a good day," he said. "You too," she said. He turned and walked out of the Starbucks. Linda looked after him with a happy sigh. She couldn't believe she had just bought a $500 Louis Vuitton bag. She thought she had won the lottery. She clutched the bag to her chest and smiled broadly. She decided to go home right away and enjoy her new purchase. She walked out of the Starbucks with a springy stride. Linda didn't notice that Mike followed her outside. She didn't notice that he pulled a knife from his backpack. She didn't notice that he walked behind her with a sinister expression on his face. She didn't notice until it was too late. He grabbed her from behind. Linda screamed as Mike attacked her. He pulled her bag from her hand, tearing the strap and causing Linda to fall to the ground. Linda was stunned and didn't know what to do. She watched helplessly as Mike ran away with her bag, which contained not only the expensive designer handbag, but also her ID card and all the cash she had withdrawn from the bank. Linda was in shock. She sat on the ground, clutching her torn bag, feeling violated and helpless. She realized she had been scammed and deceived by Mike. She had trusted him, and he had taken advantage of her. Linda knew she had to report the incident to the police, but she didn't know where to start. She had never been in a situation like this before. She felt alone and vulnerable, like a victim of a crime. She had lost her money, her ID, and her sense of security. Linda took a deep breath and stood up. She looked around for help, but no one seemed to notice her distress. She felt invisible, like a ghost. She knew she had to find a way to get back on her feet and move on, but she didn't know how. She felt lost and defeated. Ivan was a college student who had been saving up for months to buy his first car. He had been browsing Craigslist looking for a good deal on a used car. One day he saw an ad that caught his eye. It was a 2010 Honda Civic, in good condition, with low mileage and only $5,000. Evan thought it was too good to be true, but decided to contact the seller anyway. The seller responded quickly and said his name was Mark. He said he was selling the car because he had to move out of state for work and needed money right away. He said he could meet Evan at a nearby parking lot the next day and asked him to bring cash with him. Evan agreed and arranged to meet Mark at 10 a.m. The next day, Evan withdrew $5,000 from his bank account and put the money in an envelope. He took the bus to the parking lot and looked around for Mark's car. He saw a silver Honda Civic parked in the corner with a man sitting inside. Evan approached the car and knocked on the window. The man rolled down his window and smiled at Evan. He looked about 30 years old, with short brown hair and stubble. He was wearing a blue shirt and jeans. "Hi, you must be Evan," he said. "I'm Mark. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too," Evan said. "Is this the car you're selling?" "Yes, it is," Mark said. "Would you like to take a look?" "Sure," said Evan. Mark got out of the car and opened the trunk. He showed Evan the spare tire, the jack, and the tools. Then he opened the hood and showed the engine, battery, and oil. He explained that he had taken good care of the car and that it had no problems. Evan nodded, impressed by Mark's knowledge and confidence. He asked if he could take the car for a test drive. "Sure," Mark said. "But can I see the money first?" Evan hesitated for a moment. He was uncomfortable handing over the money before he got behind the wheel of the car. But he also didn't want to pass up the opportunity. He decided to trust Mark. "Sure," Evan said. "Here you go." He pulled an envelope from his backpack and held it out to Mark. Mark took the envelope and opened it. He quickly counted the bills and smiled. "Thank you," he said. "You're a smart customer." He put the envelope in his pocket. "So, are you ready to drive?" he asked. "Yes," Evan replied. Mark handed him the keys. "Here you go," he said. "The car is all yours." Evan felt a rush of excitement. He couldn't believe he had just bought his first car. He got in the driver's seat and fastened his seat belt. Mark got in the passenger seat. "Let's go," Evan said. He started the car and drove out of the parking lot. He drove out of the parking lot onto the street. "So, where are you from?" asked Mark. "I'm from Chicago," said Evan. "Me too," said Mark. "What do you do?" "I'm a student," said Evan. "What are you studying?" "Business administration." "That's cool." They made small talk as they drove through the neighborhood. Mark seemed friendly and at ease. He complimented Evan on his driving skills and gave him some tips on car care. Evan felt more relaxed and comfortable with Mark. He thought he got a good deal with a nice guy. He decided to go back to the parking lot. "Hey, can we stop at the gas station?" asked Mark. "Why?" asked Evan. "I need to go to the bathroom," said Mark. "Okay," said Evan. He saw a gas station nearby and pulled over to the side of the road. Mark got out of the car. "I'll be right back," he said. He walked toward the gas station building. Evan was waiting in the car. He looked at his new car with pride and joy. He couldn't wait to show it off to his friends and family. He checked his phone for messages. He saw that his mother had texted him. She asked him if he had bought a car yet. He replied that he had just bought it and that it was awesome. She congratulated him and asked him to send her a picture of it. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of himself with his new car. He sent it to his mom. She replied that she was happy for him and that she loved him. He smiled at her message. He looked up from the phone screen. He saw Mark running toward him from across the street. He was holding something in his hand. It looked like a gun. Evan felt a rush of fear. He didn't understand what was happening. He saw Mark point the gun at him through the windshield. He heard him shout something unintelligible. He saw him pull the trigger. Ivan instinctively ducked as he heard a loud explosion. He felt something hit him in the shoulder. He felt pain and shock. He looked at his shoulder and saw blood seeping through his shirt. He realized he had been shot. He screamed in pain and horror. He saw Mark open the door and grab him by the collar. He felt Mark driving him behind him. Ivan tried to fight back, but he was weak from the shock of being shot. He felt Mark's grip tighten on his collar as he dragged him out of the car and onto the ground. Ivan's head hit the pavement hard, and he felt a sharp pain in his temple. He tried to crawl away, but Mark kicked him in the ribs. Ivan gasped for air as the wind was knocked out of him. He felt Mark rifling through his pockets, taking his phone, wallet, and the envelope of cash. He heard Mark laughing as he got back into the car and drove away. Ivan lay there, bleeding and helpless. He thought he was going to die. He couldn't move his left arm or leg, and his vision was blurry. He managed to reach for his phone with his good arm and called 911. He told them what had happened and where he was. He heard the sound of sirens in the distance and felt a sense of relief. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived and Evan was rushed to the hospital. He underwent emergency surgery to remove the bullet from his shoulder. He was in a lot of pain and was heavily sedated. The police arrived at the gas station and began their investigation. They interviewed witnesses, collected evidence, and reviewed surveillance footage from nearby cameras. Within a few hours, they had identified Mark as the suspect. They discovered that he had used a fake name and a stolen car to lure Ivan into a trap. They tracked down the car and found it abandoned in a nearby alley. The police issued an alert for Mark and circulated his description to other law enforcement agencies. 2 days later, Mark was arrested in a neighboring state. He was caught trying to sell the stolen car to a pawn shop. He was charged with armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and car theft. He was held in jail without bail pending his trial. Ivan was discharged from the hospital a week later. He was still in pain and had to wear a sling on his left arm. But he was grateful to be alive. He thanked the police for their swift action and vowed to testify against Mark in court. A few months later, Ivan attended Mark's trial as a witness. He testified about the events that led up to the shooting and identified Mark as the perpetrator. He described how Mark had lured him into a trap and robbed him at gunpoint. He also showed the jury his scar and explained how the bullet had narrowly missed his vital organs. The jury found Mark guilty on all charges and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Ivan felt a sense of closure and justice. He realized that he had been lucky to survive the ordeal and that it had taught him a valuable lesson about trusting strangers. He also learned to appreciate life more and to never take anything for granted. Linda has always had a passion for technology. She loved exploring new gadgets and devices that could make her life easier and more fun. She was especially interested in smart flash drives, small storage devices that could connect to any computer and perform various tasks, such as hacking, encrypting, or deleting data. She had heard that some hackers were using them to break into secure systems and steal valuable information. Linda wanted to get her hands on one of these smart flash drives, but they were very expensive and hard to find. She searched the internet for a long time until she came across an ad on Craigslist that offered a brand new smart flash drive for only $200. The seller claimed it was the latest model, with 128 gigabytes capacity and 10 gigs speed. Linda was intrigued by the offer and decided to contact the seller. She sent him an email asking for more information and pictures of the device. He quickly responded, saying that he had bought it from a friend who worked for a technology company, but that he no longer needed it. He attached some pictures of the flash drive, which looked sleek and shiny, with a small LED light and a USB-C port. He also said he could meet her at a nearby Starbucks the next day at noon. Linda agreed to the deal and made an appointment. She withdrew $200 from her bank account and put it in her purse. She also took her laptop with her to test out the flash drive before she bought it. She was very excited and curious to see what the device could do. She arrived at Starbucks 10 minutes before noon and looked around for the salesman. She had seen his picture in her email profile, so she knew what he looked like. He was a tall, thin man with short brown hair and glasses. He was wearing a black sweatshirt and jeans. She noticed him sitting at a corner table and holding a paper bag in his hand. He waved and smiled at her. Linda walked up to him and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Linda, and you must be Mike," she said. "Hi, Linda. Nice to meet you," he said. "I have a flash drive here." He opened a paper bag and pulled out a small box. He held it out to her and said, "Here it is, the smart flash drive you wanted." Linda took the box and examined it. It looked exactly like the pictures he had sent her. She opened it and saw the flash drive inside, wrapped in plastic. "Looks great," she said. "Can I try it on my laptop?" "Sure, go ahead," he said. Linda pulled her laptop out of her backpack and turned it on. She inserted a flash drive into one of the USB ports and waited for it to be recognized by the system. She opened File Explorer and saw that the flash drive had a name, SEMAT 2021. She clicked on it and saw that it had several folders and files on it. She opened one of the folders that was labeled Hacking Tools. It contained various programs and scripts that could be used to hack into various systems and networks. She opened another folder that was labeled Encryption Tools. It contained various algorithms and keys that could be used to encrypt or decrypt data. She opened another folder which was called Deletion Tools. It contained various methods and commands that could be used to permanently delete data. She was amazed at what she saw. The flash drive was indeed very smart and powerful. It seemed to have everything she needed to be a hacker. She looked at Mike and said, "This is incredible. How did you get this?" He shrugged and said, "Like I said, I got it from a friend who works for a technology company. He said they were developing them for some government project, but he managed to smuggle one out for me." "Wow," she said. "That's amazing." She decided to buy the flash drive without any hesitation. She reached into her purse and pulled out $200 in cash. "Here you go," she said, holding out the money to him. He took the money and quickly counted it. "Thank you," he said. He put the money in his pocket and stood up. "Well, I guess this is goodbye then," he said. He held out his hand for a handshake. Linda shook his hand and said, "Thank you for selling me this." He smiled and said, "No problem." He let go of her hand and turned around. But no sooner had he left than he suddenly grabbed her purse from her shoulder and ran out the door. Linda was shocked by his sudden action. She screamed and ran after him. "Hey, stop, thief," she shouted. She ran out of the Starbucks and saw him running across the street. She ran after him, dodging cars and pedestrians. She saw him turn into an alley and ran after him. She went into the alley and saw him standing still, holding her purse in one hand. She approached him cautiously, trying to grab her purse back. But as soon as she got close, he pepper sprayed her in the face and fled. Linda fell to the ground, coughing and gasping for air. She couldn't see anything, her eyes were burning and watering. She lay there for a few moments, trying to catch her breath. Then she stood up and stumbled back to the street. Several people came to her aid, offering her water and tissues. They asked her what happened, but she could barely speak. She managed to say that she had been robbed and pepper sprayed. They called the police and an ambulance. The police arrived within minutes, but the thief was nowhere to be found. They took Linda's statement and searched the area, but they couldn't find any trace of him. Linda was taken to the hospital, where she was treated for pepper spray exposure. Her eyes were washed out, and she was given medication to ease the burning and stinging. She was discharged a few hours later and went back to her apartment, feeling shaken and violated. She realized that the smart flash drive and her purse were gone. The thief had managed to sell them and make a quick profit. She felt angry and frustrated. She had been duped by a scammer and a thief. She had lost her money, her personal belongings, and her sense of security. The police continued to investigate the case, but they couldn't find any solid leads. Linda tried to move on and focus on her work and her hobbies. She realized that she had to be more careful and cautious when buying things online or from strangers. She learned a valuable lesson from this experience, that the world can be a dangerous and unpredictable place, and that one should always be vigilant and alert. She hoped that the thief would be caught and brought to justice, but she knew that the chances were slim. Alex was a photography enthusiast who loved to capture the beauty of nature and people. He had a collection of cameras and lenses that he used for different occasions. He was always looking for new equipment to improve his skills and expand his portfolio. One day, he saw an advertisement on Craigslist for a professional-grade camera that he had always wanted to own. The seller claimed that he was moving out of the country and needed to sell this camera quickly. He offered it for $2,000, which was half the market price. Alex thought it was too good to be true, but he decided to contact the seller anyway. The seller replied to his email and gave him his phone number. He said his name was Tom and that he lived in Orlando, about an hour away from Alex's home in Tampa. He suggested that they meet at a public parking lot near a mall. He said he would bring the camera and the receipt, and that he only accepted cash. Alex agreed to meet him the next day at noon. He withdrew $2,000 from his bank account and put it in an envelope. He also took his camera and lens, which he planned to trade with Tom if he liked it. He drove to Orlando and arrived at the parking lot 10 minutes before the scheduled time. He parked his car and looked around for Tom. He saw a black SUV with tinted windows parked in a corner. He walked towards it and saw a man sitting in the driver's seat. He waved at him and approached the window. "Hi, are you Tom?" Alex asked. The man rolled down the window and smiled. He had short brown hair and a stubble beard. He wore a blue polo shirt and sunglasses. "Hey, Alex." "Yeah, I'm Tom." "Nice to meet you," he said. "Nice to meet you too. Do you have the camera?" Alex asked. "Sure, it's right here." Tom reached to the back seat and picked up a black backpack. He opened it and showed Alex the camera inside. It looked brand new and shiny. "Wow, it's beautiful," Alex said. "Yeah, it is. I barely used it. It's too bad I have to sell it," Tom said. "Why are you moving out of the country?" Alex asked. "I got a job offer in Dubai. It's a great opportunity for me," Tom said. "That's awesome." "Congratulations," Alex said. "Thanks. So, do you want to see the camera?" Tom asked. "Sure. Can I hold it?" Alex asked. "Of course." Tom handed him the backpack through the window. Alex took it and opened it again. He took out the camera and examined it carefully. It felt heavy and solid in his hands. He turned it on and checked the settings and the battery level. Everything seemed fine. He looked at Tom and smiled. "It's perfect," he said. "Great. So, do you have cash?" asked Tom. "Yes, I do." Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope of money. He held it out to Tom through the window. Tom took it and quickly opened it. He counted the bills and nodded. "Looks good," he said. He put the envelope in his pocket and smiled at Alex. "Thanks for doing business with me," he said. "No problem." "Thanks for selling me this wonderful camera," Alex said. He was about to throw his backpack on his shoulder when he heard another voice behind him. "Hey, buddy, what do you got there?" Alex turned around and saw another man standing behind him. He was taller and bulkier than him. He was taller and bulkier than Tom, with blonde hair and a tattoo on his neck. He was wearing a black leather jacket and jeans. He had a menacing expression on his face. Alex felt a rush of fear in his chest. "Who are you?" he asked nervously. "I'm Jake, Tom's partner," the man said. He stepped closer to Alex and grabbed his arm. "Let go of me," yelled Alex. He tried to break free from Jake's grip, but Jake was too strong for him. "What are you doing?" asked Alex. "We're doing this," said Jake. He slapped Alex in the face with his free hand. The force of the slap made Alex lose his balance and fall to the ground. He hit his head on the concrete pavement and everything went black. He didn't know how long he was out, but when he woke up, he felt a sharp pain in his head. He groaned and tried to sit up, but his body felt weak and numb. He looked around and saw that Tom and Jake were gone. His backpack with his camera and lens was missing too. He realized that he had been robbed. He took out his phone and called 911. He reported the incident and gave his location. He told the operator that he had been hit and robbed and that he needed medical attention. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived at the scene. The paramedics examined him and found that he had a concussion and a few bruises on his face and arms. They gave him some painkillers and took him to the hospital for further treatment. At the hospital, Alex was questioned by the police. He gave them a detailed description of Tom and Jake and their car. He also told them about the camera and the money that he had brought for the exchange. The police launched an investigation and circulated a description of the suspects and their vehicle. A few hours later, they located the car on a highway and chased it down. Tom and Jake tried to evade the police, but they were eventually caught. The police found Alex's camera and lens in the car, along with the envelope of cash. They also found a few other stolen items, including jewelry and electronics. Tom and Jake were arrested and charged with robbery, assault, and possession of stolen property. Alex was relieved that the robbers were caught and that his camera and lens were returned to him. He was grateful to the police and the paramedics for their help and support. He learned a valuable lesson about buying expensive items from strangers and vowed to be more cautious in the future. In 2016 in Los Angeles, a young woman named Jessica was looking for a new cell phone. She had been saving up for months to buy a smartphone that would allow her to stay in touch with family and friends, take pictures, and browse the internet. On Craigslist, she saw an ad for a Samsung for sale that was in good condition and within her budget. She contacted the seller, who said his name was Mike, and arranged to meet him at a Starbucks near his apartment. Jessica was anxious and nervous as she drove to the meeting place. She had never bought anything on Craigslist before, but she had heard that it was a popular and reliable way to find great deals online. She hoped Mike was honest and trustworthy, and that the firm was as good as he claimed. She parked the car in the parking lot and walked toward the cafe, carrying her purse with her money and papers. She noticed Mike sitting at a table near the entrance to the Starbucks. He was a tall and muscular man with short brown hair and a bristly beard. He was dressed in a black leather jacket and jeans, and a backpack lay on the ground beside him. He smiled and waved at Jessica as she approached him. "Hi, you must be Jessica. And I'm Mike. Nice to meet you," he said as he stood up and shook her hand. "Hi, Mike. Nice to meet you too," Jessica said, smiling back. "Thanks for coming." "I have my phone here," he said, reaching into his backpack and pulling out a black box. He opened the box and showed Jessica the phone. It looked shiny and new, with no scratches or dents. Jessica felt a rush of excitement when she saw it. "Wow, it looks great," she said. "Yeah, it's practically new. I only used it for a few weeks. But then I got an iPhone as a gift from my girlfriend, so I don't need this one anymore," Mike said. "It's a fluke. How much do you want for it?" asked Jessica. "I'm asking $300, but I'm willing to bargain," said Mike. Jessica thought for a moment. She had $350 in her purse, which was all the money she'd been saving for her phone. She wanted to get a good deal, but at the same time she didn't want to lose the opportunity to buy a phone. "Would you mind taking $250? She asked. Mike pretended to think for a while, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, that's too little. How about $280? He said. Jessica hesitated. She wanted to save some money for herself, but she also really wanted the phone. "Okay, fine. $280, she agreed. "Great. Do you have cash?" asked Mike. "Yes, I do," Jessica said. She opened her purse and pulled out her wallet. She counted out $280 in bills and handed it to Mike. Mike took the money and put it in his pocket. He smiled and handed Jessica a box of phones. "Here you go, enjoy your new phone," he said. Jessica took the box and thanked him. She opened it and turned the phone on. It worked fine. She felt happy and relieved that she had made a good purchase. "Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it," she said. "No problem. It was a pleasure doing business with you," Mike said. Then he looked at his watch and pretended to be surprised. "I'd look at the time. I've got to go. I have another meeting in half an hour," he said. He picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. "It was nice meeting you, Jessica." "Have a good day," he said. He waved goodbye and walked quickly away. Jessica waved back and looked after him. She was a little sad that he was leaving so soon, but she knew he had other things to do. She decided to stop at Starbucks and order a coffee before heading back to her car. She hung her purse on her shoulder and walked to the door of the coffee shop. She didn't notice that Mike turned around and followed behind her. He waited until she reached the Starbucks door, then ran up to her and grabbed her arm. He yanked her back with force and pushed her toward his car, which was parked next to her car in the parking lot. He threw her into the back seat of his car and slammed the door behind him. He jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. He drove out of the parking lot at high speed, leaving Jessica's car with the keys in the ignition. Jessica screamed and struggled as she realized what had happened. She fought back, digging her nails into Mike's face and kicking him as hard as she could. She managed to escape from his grasp and opened the car door, jumping out of the moving vehicle. Mike sped away with Jessica's purse, which contained her money, documents, and phone. She was left alone and shaken, with bruises and scratches on her body. Fortunately, some bystanders witnessed the incident and called the police. After a thorough investigation, the authorities were able to track down Mike and arrest him for robbery and assault. Jessica was able to recover her stolen belongings and receive medical attention for her injuries. She learned a valuable lesson about being careful when dealing with strangers online and in person. Jim always dreamed of having a big screen TV. He loved watching movies and sports and dreamed of having a home theater that would make his friends jealous. He saved money for months, working part-time at the diner and cutting back on his expenses. Finally, he saved enough money to buy a used TV on Craigslist. He found a good deal online, a 65-inch Samsung Smart TV for just $500. The seller claimed the TV was in perfect condition and that he was selling it because he was moving to another state. Jim contacted the seller and arranged to meet him at his home in a rural area near Austin, Texas. Jim drove his old pickup truck to the address the salesman gave him. It was a sunny afternoon in June 2018, and Jim felt anxious and nervous. He hoped the TV was as good as it looked to the pictures and that the seller was honest and reliable. He pulled up to the seller's house, which was a dilapidated trailer surrounded by junk and weeds. He parked his truck in front of the trailer and got out, carrying a backpack with $500 in cash. He knocked on the door and waited. The door was opened by a man. He was tall and thin, with long greasy hair and a thick beard. He was wearing a stained t-shirt and jeans, with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. He looked at Jim with a smirk. "Hi, you must be Jim," he said. "I'm Dave, the guy who sells the TV." "Hi, Dave," Jim said, trying to sound friendly. "Nice to meet you." "Come on in," Dave said, stepping aside. "The TV is right over here." Jim followed Dave into the trailer. It was dark and dirty inside, with piles of clothes, dishes, and trash lying everywhere. In the corner of the living room, Jim saw a large cardboard box. It had Samsung written on it in black marker. "Is that it?" asked Jim, pointing to the box. "Yes, that's it," said Dave. "The TV is inside. I just packed it this morning." "Can I see it?" asked Jim. Sure, said Dave. "But let me see the money first." Jim hesitated. He didn't like Dave's behavior. He looked nervous and impatient and kept looking around as if waiting for someone. "I'll show you the money after I watch TV," Jim said. Dave frowned. "Come on, kid," he said. "Don't be like that. I'm not trying to rip you off or anything. I just want to make sure you have the money." Jim felt uneasy. He had a bad feeling about this deal. He wished he had brought someone with him, or at least told him where he was going. "Listen, Dave," he said. "I don't mean to be rude, but I don't trust you. How do I know that there really is a TV in that box? How do I know it works? How do I know you're not going to take my money and run away?" The expression on Dave's face changed. He dropped his cigarette on the floor and stepped on it. He clutched his fist and walked towards Jim. "What did you say?" he said, his voice rising. "I said I don't trust you," Jim repeated, taking a step back. Dave grabbed Jim by the collar of his shirt and pushed him against the wall. "You think I'm a liar?" he yelled. "You think I'm trying to scam you? You little punk." He punched Jim in the face, knocking him down. Jim felt his nose bleeding and his vision blurring. He tried to get up, but Dave kicked him in the stomach, making him gasp for air. "You're going to regret this," Dave said, grabbing the backpack with the money. "And this TV is mine now. Got it?" He picked up the cardboard box and walked out of the trailer, leaving Jim on the floor, groaning in pain. Jim stayed there for a few minutes, trying to catch his breath and gather his thoughts. He realized he had been a fool to come here alone and to trust a stranger on the internet. He had lost his money and his dream of having a big screen TV. He stumbled to his feet and walked out of the trailer. He saw Dave's pickup truck driving away with the cardboard box in the back. He knew he couldn't catch him or call the police in time. He got into his own truck and drove back to Austin, feeling defeated and humiliated. He knew he had learned a valuable lesson, but it didn't ease the pain in his nose or his wallet. He decided to take a break from Craigslist and online deals, at least for a while. He also decided to invest in a good security system and to learn self-defense, just in case he ever had to face a crook like Dave again. Robert had always loved music. Ever since he was a little boy, he dreamed of becoming a famous musician and performing in front of huge crowds. He learned to play guitar, piano and drums, and practiced every day in his small apartment in Brooklyn. He also saved up money from his part-time job at a coffee shop to buy new musical instruments and equipment. One day, he saw an ad on Craigslist that caught his eye. The seller claimed to have a rare vintage Gibson Les Paul guitar for sale at a very low price. Robert had always wanted such a guitar, but he knew they were very expensive and hard to find. He decided to contact the seller and make an appointment. The salesman, who called himself Mike, told Robert to meet him in the parking lot near Central Park at 9 p.m. He said he would bring the guitar and show it to him before closing the deal. Robert agreed and took the subway to the location. He was very excited and nervous at the same time. He hoped the guitar was real and not a scam. He arrived at the parking lot a few minutes before 9 p.m. As he looked around, he saw several parked cars, but neither Mike nor the guitar were in sight. He decided to wait and texted Mike to let him know he was coming. Mike replied that he was on his way and asked Robert to wait outside the blue van. Robert walked over to the blue van and waited. He checked his phone again and saw that it was 9:15 p.m. He began to wonder where Mike was and why he was waiting so long. He began to feel anxious and suspicious. He thought about leaving, but then he heard a voice behind him. "Hey, are you Robert?" Robert turned around and saw a man in a leather jacket and sunglasses. He had a backpack on his shoulder and a smile on his face. "Yeah, that's me. Are you Mike?" asked Robert. "Right. Sorry I'm late. I had car trouble," said Mike. He walked over to Robert and held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Robert. I've got my guitar here in my backpack. Would you like to see it?" said Mike. Robert shook his hand and nodded. "Sure I do," said Robert. He followed Mike to the back of the van, where Mike opened his backpack and pulled out a black guitar case. "Here it is, the Gibson Les Paul you were looking for," said Mike. He opened the case and showed Robert the guitar inside. It looked shiny and new, with a dark brown body and cream-colored fingerboard. It had 4 controls and 2 humbuckers. Robert's eyes widened when he saw the guitar. It looked exactly like the one he had seen in pictures and videos on the internet. "Wow, what a beauty," said Robert. He reached out to touch it, but Mike quickly yanked it away. "Not so fast, buddy. It's not a toy. It's a masterpiece," said Mike. He closed the case and zipped up his backpack. "So do you want it or not?" asked Mike. Robert nodded impatiently. Yes, I do," said Robert. He took his wallet out of his pocket and counted the money. He had $2,000 in cash that he had withdrawn from his bank account earlier that day. He knew that was more than enough to buy a guitar. "Okay, let's make it quick," said Mike. He snatched the wallet from Robert's hands and opened it. "Hey, what are you doing?" asked Robert. Mike ignored him and counted the money inside. $2,000, that's not enough," Mike said. He looked at Robert with a chuckle. "That guitar is worth at least $5,000. You're trying to rip me off, aren't you?" said Mike. Robert felt confused and scared. "What? No, I'm not. You said in your ad that you were selling it for $1,500, said Robert. Mike shook his head and laughed. "It was just a decoy, kid. You fell for it like a sucker," said Mike. He tossed Robert's wallet back at him and motioned to 2 other men who had come out of the van. "These are my partners. We don't like people who waste our time and money." "You're going to pay for it, kid," said Mike. Robert realized he was in trouble. He tried to run, but the men caught him and beat him up. They took all his money, as well as his shoes and phone. Passers-by called the police and an ambulance, and after a while the robbers were caught. Robert ended up in the hospital with a broken nose and several bruises. He was traumatized by the experience and lost all his savings. He had to quit his job at the coffee shop because he couldn't work with a broken nose. Despite everything, Robert didn't give up on his dream of becoming a musician. He took some time to heal and then started playing again. He even wrote a song about his experience and performed it in small clubs around Brooklyn. In 2018 in Atlanta, Georgia, a young man named Timothy Bosworth was browsing Craigslist looking for a great deal on a new laptop. He was in college majoring in computer science, and he needed a powerful machine to run his programs and projects. He had saved some money working part-time at a pizza place, but he still couldn't afford to buy a new laptop at the store. He came across an ad that caught his eye. It offered a MacBook Pro with state-of-the-art features and capabilities. The seller claimed to have won it in a lottery and that he didn't need it because he already had another laptop. He was asking $800, which was less than half the retail price. Timothy thought that was too good to be true, but decided to contact the seller anyway. He sent him a text message and asked if the laptop was still available. The seller quickly responded and said yes. He said he lived in Marietta a suburb of Atlanta, and that he could meet Timothy anywhere in the city. Timothy offered to meet at a Starbucks near his campus, but Sellers said he would prefer to meet at a gas station near his home. He said it was more convenient for him and that he didn't want to drive too far. Timothy hesitated, but agreed. He thought that maybe the salesman was just being cautious and didn't want to reveal his address. Timothy got in his car and drove to the gas station. He checked his phone and saw that the seller had sent him a picture of the laptop and its serial number. He checked the serial number and made sure it matched the model and year of manufacture of the MacBook Pro he wanted. He felt more confident and enthusiastic about the deal. He arrived at the gas station and parked his car up front. As he looked around, he saw a man standing next to a red pickup truck. The man waved at him and smiled. He was wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a leather jacket. He looked about 30 or 40 years old. "Hi, are you Timothy?" the man asked. "Yes, I am. And you must be the salesman," said Timothy. "That's right." "I'm Mike," said the man. He opened the door of his truck and pulled out a black backpack. He walked over to Timothy and handed him the backpack. "Here you go, buddy. There's a laptop inside. You can check it out if you want," Mike said. Timothy opened the backpack and saw a silver laptop wrapped in bubble wrap. He pulled it out and unwrapped it. It looked brand new and shiny. He opened it and pressed the power button. It turned on and the Apple logo appeared on the screen. "Wow, this is amazing," Timothy said. "I told you, kid, this is a great deal," Mike said. Timothy looked at Mike and smiled. "Thanks a lot for that," Timothy said. "No problem, buddy. Now, do you have any cash?" asked Mike. Timothy nodded and reached into his pocket. He pulled out an envelope containing $800 in cash. He counted the bills and handed them to Mike. Mike took the envelope and opened it. He quickly scanned the bills with his eyes and nodded. "Sounds good to me," Mike said. He put the envelope in his jacket pocket and smiled. "Well, it's been a pleasure doing business with you, Timothy," Mike said. He held out his hand for a handshake. Timothy shook his hand and smiled back. "Likewise, Mike," Timothy said. Mike let go of his hand and turned around. "Have a good day, buddy," Mike said. He walked back to his truck and got in. He started the engine and drove off. Timothy watched him drive away and felt happy. He had just bought his dream laptop for less. He couldn't wait to use it for schoolwork and entertainment. He closed the laptop and put it back in his backpack. He slung it over his shoulder and went to his car. He opened the door and got in. He put the backpack on the passenger seat and buckled up. He started the car and drove away from the gas station. He decided to go back to his dorm room and set up his new laptop. He turned on the radio and hummed his favorite songs. He didn't notice that another car was following him from behind. It was a black sedan with tinted windows. Inside sat two men wearing masks and gloves. They had been watching Timothy from afar since he arrived at the gas station. They had seen him exchange money with Mike and take his laptop from him. They knew that Timothy had just been scammed by Mike, who was their partner in crime. They knew that Mike had sold him a fake laptop that looked like the real thing, but didn't work at all. They knew that Mike had used fake bills from another scammer who had sold him a fake laptop to pay for it. They also knew that Timothy had $800 in cash in his backpack, which they wanted to take from him. They followed Timothy's car until they pulled into a secluded street with no cars or pedestrians. They accelerated and crashed into Timothy's car from behind. Timothy felt a sharp jolt as his car jerked forward from the impact. He lost control of his steering wheel and crashed into a nearby tree. The airbags deployed, and he hit his head on the steering wheel. Before he could recover from the shock, the two masked men approached his car. They smashed the window with a bat and pulled him out of the car. "Give us your backpack, and we won't hurt you," one of the men said. Timothy was still dizzy from the impact and couldn't react fast enough. He tried to resist, but the men hit him with the bat and knocked him out. When he woke up, he was lying on the ground, bleeding from his head. His backpack was gone, and his laptop was nowhere to be seen. He tried to get up, but his body was in pain. He looked around and saw his car and the black sedan speeding away in the distance. He realized that he had been attacked and robbed. He reached for his phone, but it was also gone. He was stranded and alone, with no way to call for help. He managed to crawl to the sidewalk and lay there, hoping that someone would find him soon. He felt scared and helpless, wondering how he would survive this ordeal. Cassandra had been saving up for months to buy a car. She was tired of taking the bus to work every day and wanted more freedom and convenience. She searched the internet for a good deal and found it on Craigslist. A man named Mark was selling his car for only $6,000. He claimed he was moving out of state and needed to sell the car quickly. Cassandra contacted him and arranged to meet him in the parking lot outside his apartment. She withdrew the money from her bank account and put it in an envelope. She took a cab to the meeting place and waited for Mark to show up. She checked her phone and saw that he texted her that he was running late and asked her to wait for him. She replied that it was fine and sat down on a bench near the entrance to the parking lot. She noticed a man walking toward her from across the street. He was wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. He seemed familiar to her, but she couldn't recognize him. He walked up to her and smiled. "Hi, are you Cassandra?" he asked. "Yes, I am." "And you're Mark?" she asked. "Right. Sorry I'm late. I had some transportation problems," he said. He held out his hand, and she shook it. He seemed friendly enough, but she felt a little uncomfortable. She wondered why he wore sunglasses on a cloudy day. "So, where's your car?" she asked. "Over there," he pointed to the blue car parked in the corner of the lot. "Can I see it?" she asked. Sure. Let's go," he said. He led her to the car. She followed him, clutching the envelope in her purse. She hoped the car was in good condition and that it wasn't a scam. They reached the car, and he opened the driver's door. "Here she is. She's in great condition. I've taken good care of her," he said. He gestured for her to get in the car and check her out. She hesitated for a moment, but then decided to agree. She got in the car and looked around. The interior was clean and smelled fresh. There were no warning lights on the dashboard. The mileage was low for a 10-year-old car. She turned to him and smiled. "Looks good," she said. "Thanks. It's a great car. You won't regret buying it," he said. He got in the passenger seat and closed the door. "So, do you have the money?" he asked nonchalantly. She nodded and reached for her purse. "Yes, I do," she said. She opened her purse and pulled out an envelope. She held it out to him. "Here," she said. He took the envelope and opened it. He quickly counted the bills and put them in his pocket. "Thank you very much," she said. He smiled slyly and held out a knife, pointing it at her. "Now give me your purse," he demanded. Cassandra's heart raced as she realized what was happening. She quickly grabbed her purse and tried to run out of the car, but he caught her by the arm and pulled her back in. He tried to grab her purse, but she fought back, hitting him with her other hand and kicking him with her feet. They struggled for a few moments until Cassandra managed to break free. She opened the car door and ran out, screaming for help. The man chased after her, but she managed to outrun him and find refuge in a nearby store. She called the police and reported what had happened. They arrived quickly and searched the area, but the man had already fled. Cassandra was shaken but relieved that she had managed to escape with her life. However, she had lost the money she had saved for months to buy the car. She realized that she had been too trusting and vowed to be more careful in the future. My opinion: many of these stories happened because of the victim's inattention and desire to earn money. For example, in one of the last stories, a young guy found a MacBook at half the market price. Anyone would know right away that there was something wrong. and he wanted to save money and ended up paying the price. Learn from other people's mistakes, or you have a chance to be in my next video. Thanks for watching. See you soon.